Hello, everybody, and welcome to Unlearning Economics. This is a bit of a different one. It's a chat that I had with somebody who's from my Discord and my reading group. He goes by the name Goose, but his actual name is Diamond. He's always really articulate and does a really close reading of the books and always has really interesting things to say, but it emerged when we were talking about inequality and poverty in the USA that he'd actually experienced homelessness for quite a substantial period of time, and he had loads of interesting things to say about that. So I thought it would be worth getting his views and his voice out onto the channel. It was absolutely 100% worth it. It was super engaging. We spoke for 3 hours. It could have been longer, but I had to go. And you'll see that I don't really say much. I don't really think I have that much to say, to be honest. I'd rather just let him talk about an experience that I just don't really understand. And yeah, I've since then I've had somebody else who's experienced homelessness come and contact me, so I might speak to them on the channel. If you have an experience of that ilk and you feel like you have things to say, then please find a way to get into contact with me, whether it's like the subreddit or the Discord or stuff, all of which are readily available from my channel. So anyway, without further ado, please enjoy. Hello everybody, and welcome to the stream. I'm hoping that everything is working, sound-wise, video-wise. If you can see both myself and Diamond and hear me, then please say so in the chat. But yes, so Diamond is somebody who I met through through streaming. He's a regular chatter, but also he joined the Patreon and the reading club, and we've been talking about various books. But Diamond always has really interesting things to say about the books, and he always seems to read them pretty intently, to be honest. But one thing that came up recently was that he's experienced homelessness in his life, and he was kind of telling us about it because we were talking about inequality and housing, and he was just telling us a load of stuff about what it's like that I just didn't fucking know. And I thought, well, I feel like more people should hear this because I feel like a lot of people don't know what it's actually like and what the main issues are. Anyway, Diamond, thanks for so much for coming on.
Yeah, so I've experienced homelessness, but also I think just probably 6 months ago, I almost went homeless again. It was pretty close. And as we'll cover, it's not just a temporary state of affairs. It's kind of a state that you exist in, and it's like a risk profile almost. So in many cases, once you've been through it once, that indicates that you have there are certain aspects about you and your life that put you at risk in an almost not permanently per se, but like you're likely to relapse, so to speak. We'll get to that anyway.
No, I mean, that's really interesting that it's something that you sort of, I mean, people might talk about getting out of homelessness or escaping it or something like that. But I suppose what you're saying is once you've been in that space, once you're vulnerable to that, you kind of feel like you never really get out of it, or it takes a lot to get out of it, perhaps.
It depends, because this is kind of the first part of the conversation, because
sure.
So what are different conceptions of homelessness? If you ask, like maybe the average kind of, I don't really think about it that much, it just seems to me that way type opinion would be, a homeless person is someone who's not that industrious. Maybe they're lazy, or they just don't work that hard, or maybe they're really dumb or something. They've got these kind of foibles. Okay, so that's one idea. And then maybe a leftist or progressive might have more charitable interpretation. They might think, well, you had like a bad early start probably, and then that had a bunch of knock-on effects that put you at risk for being homeless in some way. And so it kind of says something about your upbringing, and you had a bad socioeconomic start. Like, okay. And then maybe an economist would have a more nuanced take where it's like, well, homelessness, it's not a class of person really. there's not really a certain type. It's more like a category that people come into and out of. It's kind of a transient category because of how structural unemployment works. And so there's not this group of people who are just homeless all the time. It's more that people come in and out, depending on macroeconomic trends. And there's a certain amount of people who at any time will be homeless, but they're not really a stable group. Okay, so there's all these different ideas, but none of them are right. They just can't be. None of these ideas can be right because there's just different types of homelessness. Like that's just kind of where you have to start, is that there's just different types of homeless people and there's different categories. And so that's kind of where I wanted to begin, is like talking about the different categories and types, because I've got my own little taxonomy. It's not, super academic.
Yeah.
It's not super. It's not going to be super perfect. It's just kind of how I ended up sorting them based on my experience. So there's basically two broad categories, the way I consider it. There's category one is the kind of the more transient category. So I just call this the bounce. These are the bouncers. They tend to bounce out. So this is the category. And then category two is the kind of longer term. This is like the stuck category. So this is where you will see people for longer periods of time. Okay, so in category one, there's, the way I sort it is soft bounce and hard bounce. And as we'll cover, there's like certain characteristics that let you, with like a good amount of, with a decent amount of confidence, you can kind of predict where somebody's going to end up based on characteristics when they start. And we'll talk about that. So there's soft bounce and hard bounce, the way I categorize it. Soft bounce is basically somebody who is living on like a friend's couch, or maybe like a family member, maybe even a parent, but it's not going to be a long-term thing. It's like you got to be out in a certain amount of time sort of arrangement. And they still have plenty of social contacts. They'll have like a car. They'll still have phone service. Like they just don't have a house. Like they just don't have an apartment for whatever reason. And these people, it could be just a few weeks. Hard bounce is probably living in your car or a shelter. And I don't make a strong distinction between living in a shelter versus on the street versus in a car. The categories aren't really like that per se, like the types, as we'll cover, except for some of the really bottom-most ones. And so hard bounce is basically, they will generally have a car that they may still be making car payments on. People will typically hold on to their car, in my experience, over their apartment or living situation. They'll hold on to it, and they're correct to do so. It's smart to do that. So they might be living in their car or in a shelter, but they'll still have their car, like usually parked at the shelter or whatever. And they probably have phone service still. They still probably have a phone, and they still have some friends and family. So they still have some contacts, and they still have a connection. And so these are the two kind of subtypes. And when we start going into category two, which is the ones who tend to be stuck for longer, the big difference between category one and two, the massive, like this is the thing. This is what predicts it. It's connection to the outside. It's social connection to the outside world. Because when you start going into category two, this is what's missing. Is people in this category, and it's not all the same, of course. It's not trying to make too many crazy generalizations, but people in this category just don't have external connections to the same extent. If they have family that can't really be counted on, or that they're estranged from typically, or that they haven't seen in many years, or maybe they're in a different state or something. And if they have friends, they're not deep connections. Again, this could be related to moving, or they don't have that social capital. And people in the bounce category, soft and hard bounce, they still have some of that. They still have an external connection. And this is the big predictor. if you have an external connection to the outside worlds through friends or family, there's still a lot of hope. Like you're probably not going to be stuck for too long. And it's for two reasons. One is because they can actually help you in concrete ways. So not even talking about like money or anything. Although that could be a thing too. Like they could give you money to like keep your phone service, for example, which is a big deal. Or to keep your car so it doesn't get repossessed. But not even talking about that really. So they could help you with job contacts. They could hook you up with some jobs. They could help you with resumes. When you're having trouble, they're like an ear. They're somebody who could help you out, depending on what your problem is. Also, they have a job, these friends or family, so they might be able to get you an in. Maybe something will come up. Maybe openings come up over time, especially when you're talking about working class. Like turnover rate tends to be high, so there's a good chance that there'll be an opening that they can give you a heads up on, and maybe get you in the door or whatever. So that's big. And the second thing, though, it's arguably more important even than that. It's that there's just this is where it gets hard to put into words, but when you don't have a connection, when you don't have those social connections to the outside world, it just feels like there's no fucking point anyway. Like they just nobody cares. And this is the big thing. Like when you're homeless, it's just like so we'll talk about where I fell in this. I was in type 2, or I was in category 2, and yeah, we'll talk about that. I was a shelter dweller, so I got kind of lucky actually. I was living in a shelter, and just the amount of apathy, just nobody cares. And when I say nobody cares, I mean nobody gives a fuck. Not other homeless people, not regular people, not even really the workers. If they're, well, we'll get into that. But anyway, the point is, when you have external social connections, there's always something that's pulling you. There's like an outward pulling force. When you lack that, you can get stuck for a long time, because it's just without the sociality of it, humans just, like what? Who cares? That's like the main thing. That's the main thing that matters. So anyway, the first type I would say in the category 2, the stuckage category, you could say, is I just call them seekers, for lack of a better term. These are just some terms that I just kind of recently made up so I could talk about it. But the terms themselves, that is, the categories, again, I've had these, but anyway, I call them seekers because they're typically will be shelter dwellers, but again, almost all these categories could be shelter dwellers, or they could be on the street. It's not really there's some big differences between the two that we'll talk about, but that doesn't really determine your type, in my opinion. So, but I call them seekers because they'll typically go out a lot, and they're looking for work. They're like seeking work actively. So they'll go out a lot. They won't be at the shelter that much necessarily. And they'll be out, like, for example, the library is a big point of interest because there's computers there, so you can apply for jobs. Or maybe go to interviews or whatever. You're going around, you're hitting things up, you're trying to make things happen. They could be out doing temp work or gig work. This ends up being a big deal. So they're out there. They're seekers, and they typically are. They're typically on the younger side, so they're like working age. So if you're younger, you're probably in this category. The older you get, the uglier it gets, big time. And so these tend to be like a seeker. If you met a seeker just out and about, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell them apart from a working class person. But also at the same time, there's obviously there's the stereotype of like a homeless bum, and they're like wearing newspapers and they've got feces all over them or whatever, and they look just like raggedy bums. This is not really an accurate. This is not an accurate picture of what a homeless person looks like ever, because. So for me example, I got clothes from churches. That's typically where you get clothes from. I had a nice pair of Levi jeans that fit me perfectly. Literally the best fitting pants. I'm wearing them right now, actually, still after all this time. And I got from just like a random church. I was wearing like a nice like Henley undershirt, and one of my friends, kind of friends, we'll talk about friends. He had like some middle class parents or something. Yeah, I think he had like middle class parents, but his brother had died and he had left him some clothes, and they had some nice clothes left over. He gave him some clothes to me. One of them was like a genuine cashmere sweater. So, and I was wearing dress shoes also from the church. So I was literally walking around with super, like, perfectly fit Levi jeans, a genuine cashmere sweater, like a nice undershirt, and dress shoes. And I would be reading, at this time I was reading like Capital from Capital in the 21st Century by Piketty, which was like this thick book, plus another thick book that I can't even remember what it was. So I'd be walking around with those under my arm. So I just literally looked like a Harvard grad. I looked like a college student. You would never know that I owned absolutely nothing and that my prospects were like dog shit and I was homeless on the street. Like you would never in a million years guess that. Never. And this is kind of how it is. You can't really guess. Some of them look, some homeless people I was with, they looked just genuinely raggedy. Yeah, and you could guess. Don't get me wrong. There was also that. But in general, you can't tell by appearance, especially not by seeker, because they are kind of in and out of different work. So they have to look presentable for work. So you would just never be able to tell. And let's see. I have a few notes here to make sure I don't kind of miss anything that I wanted to mention about these people.
Can I just ask quickly about seekers?
Feel free to interrupt at any time with questions.
Sure. I didn't want to throw you off in because your taxonomy is really, really insightful. But I was just wondering with seekers, you said you're in and out of work. Now, would the people at work typically know about your situation, or was it? I mean, you're painting a picture of it being kind of hidden here. Okay,
we'll get into that because in many cases. People don't. So this is one thing. People don't seem to realize that there's also a lot of different categories of work that you don't even realize.
Right.
A lot of folks just think that you have a job and so you're not going to be homeless. Not how it works. There are types of jobs that will not ever let you get out of homelessness.
Right.
But we'll get to that.
Okay.
But related to your question though, directly, is that, for example, some of these really, really low paying temp agencies or some of this gig work would be largely or almost entirely staffed by the homeless and convicts. So they would know almost categorically that you were homeless just from the fact that you were working there. And if not, they already kind of knew and they were definitely not surprised if it came out. So now if you do happen to be working a normal job, then you in all likelihood, you would just hide the fact that you're homeless. But if it's an actual normal job that's steady, then presumably you aren't going to be homeless for too much longer, although it depends on some factors. And related for me myself, it wasn't for quite a while till I was comfortable telling people I had been homeless. Certainly not something like this. This is fairly recent, so it probably wasn't until, let's see, how even long ago was this? It was probably like 3 years before I was actually somewhat okay with telling people that I had been homeless and that it was actually just like a regular homelessness. It wasn't like some bullshit.
What was the reaction to that? What have you found is the reaction?
Well, you're generally not going to tell somebody that unless they already know you.
Yeah.
So they're going to maintain their previous. They're going to maintain, for the most part, their previous interpretation of you, whatever it was. So I was, the people I've told, they're already my somewhat friends who've known me from work. So they know I work and do a good job. So any kind of preconception about homeless being lazy or whatever, that can't, they already know that's not true. So it can't possibly affect them in that case. But if you started with that, it's a totally different matter. If you started by telling somebody, because all of this, the way people's ideas of one another you think that it's to do with some kind of rational synthesis of the information you know about them. It heavily depends on order. If a person, two different people can know the same information about you, but if they got the information in a different order, they'll have different end interpretations. So you never want to start by telling somebody that you were homeless. You would never do that. And your question depends on that order. So yeah.
No, that was my thought actually. That if you lead with it, it might lead to all sorts of like assumptions.
You never lead with it.
Yeah.
And you try to hide it from when you're applying for jobs. You try your best at all costs. You try to hide it. I actually did a very bad job of hiding it, and this hurt me a lot. There are certain things I know now that fucked me over big time then because I didn't know, but also for other reasons we'll get to.
Do you want to go back to your taxonomy? Is that where you want to? Do you want to go back to it or?
So see, I started out as a seeker. Mm-hmm. That's when I became homeless, and we'll get to that. I basically went to the homeless shelter, which there's only one. I'm in Oklahoma City, by the way. Like, what's the population right now? It's like 1 to 2 million. There's one shelter in the whole city that accepts anybody.
Wow.
That's it, as far as I know. I really don't think there's another one. And in fact, there's apparently there was a bill introduced where it's actually, you can't even have a shelter if you don't meet certain population requirements. It's bizarre. But whatever, I don't know. It's Oklahoma legislature. I don't even want to get into all that. And so there's other shelters. There's a very small number of other shelters, but they have conditions. For example, they'll only take pregnant women or they'll only take addicts. And those ones are run by churches. But even those, the total bed count is very small, we're talking. But at any rate, I'm bringing this up because when I went homeless, I went down to this shelter and basically the way it works is in this one. This is the big one in Oklahoma City. They've got like 50, I'm kind of guessing numbers. I can't quite, it's not like I counted, but they had like maybe 50 beds or maybe 40 beds, something like that for regular people. Then upstairs, they had maybe 25 or 30 for addicts.
Right.
But then also, nice thing that they did was at night when everybody was asleep, they also had some cots just on the ground that they let kind of any homeless person come in and sleep. So like, for example, if it's just really cold, if it's like, icy out there, you could just come in and sleep for the night. So I came in, slept for the night, and then I ended up, there was an opening, so I actually got into the shelter. That didn't necessarily seem like a big deal to me at the time, but it turns out I got very freaking lucky because people get turned away all the time because it's full. So I got super, super lucky. So anyway, I was a seeker to begin with, but I ended up kind of bouncing in between and kind of even sliding into type 2 at one point, and I was kind of in between them, let's say, because type 2 I just call the listless ones. So these people have, unlike seekers who still have some social contact, so seekers will maybe they have very little. I should have mentioned this. They may have a little bit of family out there. The family's probably not. The family's not going to help them, but they still have something there. They have like kind of something to maybe hope for or whatever. Maybe they have like an old boyfriend or old girlfriend that's out there somewhere. Once we start getting into this, once we get to I just call them the listless ones. Now we're in the realm of like there's almost no social network at all. There's like nothing social happening. Not even there's barely. Once you get down here, there's the only friends they may have are maybe some other homeless people at the shelter, and even those relationships will never be deep. Those will always be very shallow. So we're in the realm of like people start at this point. The threads of hope start kind of snapping. This is what economists, once we get down here, economists might start, I've heard the term discouraged worker. Once we're down here, this is kind of where that starts. This is maybe what they would call discouraged workers. These typically tend to be somewhat older people. So maybe we're talking at this point, you can kind of be any age for this. But I would say on average, from what I saw, 30 to like 45 maybe would be like the average age for this. And once you're here, it becomes, so these people are still applying for jobs is the thing.
Right.
There'll still be some applications out there, but they're doing it in like a listless kind of hopeless way where they no longer kind of expect, there's a few things. They've already been turned down so many times and they already have such a big job gap that they no longer expect that any application they put in will be accepted.
Yeah.
And they have a valid reason to think this too, because once you have a big job gap that you can't explain, you are so fucked. It's insane how fucked up you are. You don't understand. Like here's the reality, because I had a big job gap that I could not explain. And it was so hard for a long time to get a job. Like I'm talking like shit jobs, not even good jobs. Meanwhile, let's fast forward when I'm not even homeless anymore. I'm working in a plastic factory. I quit the plastic factory. Oh, no, sorry. I did this before I quit, right before. I was like, I was fed up with the job. I was like, I got to get a new job. So I went to a mall. And I went into this store in the mall that I guess I'd heard that was hiring or something. I did like a walk-in, sit-down interview. I did like the same kind of dog shit interview I usually do. My interview skills are terrible. But he was like, do you have a job? I was like, yeah, I work at this plastic factory. I got the job instantly. I was like, What the fuck? I was struggling for a job for so long. I could not get one. And now I just instantly, because I already have a job, I can instantly get another one. It's so easy because I already have one. It's like, what? I'm the same human. I'm the same person. I'm literally the same person. Like, what is this? And that's how, so anyway, the point is, in this for what I'm saying right now, is the job gap itself is just like, holy shit. It's like a cinder block around your neck. You can't get by it. So they know this. These listless ones, they know this. They have so little hope when they apply for any job. They do not think it will work. I know, because I was in this. I was like fully into this category at one point, where I had applied for so many jobs. Like, I'm talking hundreds of jobs here. And here's another job. Like, oh, this would be nice. It's not even entering into my mind the possibility of getting it. I'm not even thinking about the reality where I have this job, because that reality does not exist in my head. And not only that though, so once you start getting down here, self-esteem starts dissolving like big time. And nobody will ever admit it. Like, nobody will ever say that I'm homeless because I'm lazy. But this is where you start feeling that that's actually true. You're like, wow, I am actually kind of fucking worthless. I am worthless as shit, actually. And that's why I'm here. And because people, so here's the thing. People are typically fine with admitting that they're homeless in this case, but let's just say you're like a poor kind of working class person who doesn't have a lot of prospects in life. It doesn't feel like. People are fine with admitting that their current bad situation is because of stupidity or bad decisions or maybe bad opportunity, like a bad start in life. People are fine with all of this. They're fine with any kind of individualist explanation, I should say. So any kind of character, if it's based in their own flaws, they're mostly fine with that, except for laziness, because at least in America, and I think just kind of in any capitalist culture to a certain extent, but especially in America, hard work and laziness are moral in nature. They are moral categories. So if you say that I am, if you say that I am lazy, like I am homeless because I'm lazy, you are morally condemning yourself. People do not like that. Now you'll sometimes see like a working class person or just anybody who they might jocularly express that, oh yeah, I'm lazy, but they still have a job, and they know that they have a job, and that they know that they're kind of doing fine in life. So they're kind of doing it as a joke. They don't think it's serious. But somebody who's genuinely in this situation, like they, once you get to the point where, because you just start feeling that it's true, like you're like, it's a cultural belief on some level, and you'll never hear anybody say it out loud. Like nobody will ever say it to your face that you're unindustrious, you're lazy. That's why you're homeless, because you just can't do what normal people do. Like you don't have it in you. Nobody will ever say it, but that's the cultural attitude. And these cultural attitudes have a way of making their path into your head through through some way or another. And you start feeling it. And so for me, I started feeling it. I was like, wow, I just don't like work, I guess. I just don't like work. And I would think about some job that I needed to apply to. Maybe, I don't know, it might have been it could be some retail job, like just some basic job. And I'd be like, man, can I handle this? Can I handle that workload? It's funny. It's a ridiculous thing to think, because these jobs tend to be very easy. Like once you do them, they're fine. Well, easy is a bit of an odd word. Well, we can talk about that later. But
simple.
They're simple. Once you get used to them, there's no issue with actually doing the tasks. But once you're in this category, in the listless category, you start doubting your ability to even do this work at all. You're like, am I going to give out on the job? Like, am I going to be able to do this? I kind of don't think, because you're looking at the evidence. You're just looking at the evidence. You're like, well, I've been homeless for so long, and there's supposedly all these jobs out there. So if there's jobs out there and I'm not doing them and I'm homeless, that must be because I can't or don't want to do them. Right? Like you yourself are looking at the evidence of your own situation. And so people in this category, the threads start snapping. Like they don't have any social and there's no counterforce. This is the other thing. There's no counterforce. There's no friends or family that can pull you out of this. They don't exist. There's nobody on the outside who can help you. They do not exist at all. So in my case, when I went homeless, I had two friends from university who they were kind of friends. Like I don't know. It's not like I didn't really know them that well, but they took my belongings that would have had to get thrown out otherwise, like my old computer and some random stuff. And so they held them, at their house for me when I made it out on the other side. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll come visit you like once every 2 weeks. I was homeless for 9 months total. They came, I think they visited me twice. Like people forget about you. They just straight up forget about you because you can't keep in contact with them anyway. Like you don't have at this point, once you're down here, like you don't have a phone anymore. You don't have phone service anymore. Like you can't keep in contact with anybody. Nobody wants to keep in contact with you either. Why would they? Like you're not experiencing anything. You're not depressed, but you're not feeling great about life. Like why would anybody want to talk to you? There's just nothing in it for them. Like what the hell? So there's just nothing to pull you out once you get here. It's kind of bad. So when economists talk about like macroeconomic upturns and how those can, like a tight job market, how it can pull homeless people out of, back into the job market. Mostly those are bouncers and seekers, and there may be some listless ones. Like maybe when you're here again, because they do have there'll be some applications. You'll have some applications out there floating in the ether on Indeed.com or whatever. It's just that 99.999% of these employers will just throw them away for various reasons that I've mentioned. And also, again, because you're pursuing this listlessly, you don't really have much hope. You're not doing it in the best way. And again, because you're so disadvantaged, you really need to be pursuing it in the best way to even have a chance. So yeah. And so after that, okay, so after this is where it starts getting sad though. Because here's a category that people even talk about this. So I just call these the despondents. So these people typically tend to be quite old. So I'm talking like 50 plus. These people genuinely have no fucking hope at all. And it's not like a mental thing. Like they genuinely just have no fucking hope. Like even for me looking at it, like, wow, this person, there's nothing there's no prospects. They have very low physical ability generally. from years of like bad nutrition and bad upkeep. And we'll talk about nutrition, by the way, not just with homeless, but just working class in general, and how nutrition, the record on nutrition gets all messed up. People have it backwards how the causation works. But anyway, they have very low physical ability. Any job skills that they once had have long since disintegrated. They have no relevant work experience. They have, at this point, I've been talking about social relations. Once we're at this point, there's nothing. There is nothing at all. Any family they've had are probably dead, or they haven't been seen. We're talking about contact hasn't been seen in decades. No friends, probably not even really friends at the shelter. Not even other homeless friends. Not really. There's just nothing. They're desolate. These people are absolutely desolate, and I call them despondents. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're just in a vegetative state. Although there was this one guy called Richard, for example. This guy, I'll have cause to talk about some of the specific people I met, because the characters you meet when you're homeless are just like on another fucking planet compared to any other class of person you'll meet in life. But there's one called Richard, which so Richard was like maybe 55. He was very clean. He was remarkably clean. He had this peachy skin that was just perfect. He had like he looked like Santa Claus, I guess. He had like a white, really well kept white beard and hair. He was a little bit fat, I guess, a little bit overweight, but he was very well dressed always and super clean. So here's what Richard would do. There was two common rooms in the shelter. There's a more forward facing one, and there's a more back facing one, a more recessed one. So he'd be in the recessed common room, and he'd put a chair against one wall, like kind of in a corner where it faced away as much as possible from everybody. And he would sit in that chair, and that's it. He would sit in that chair and not move. He didn't move. He didn't talk. He would talk to himself, actually. He would kind of mumble to himself, which was common. But if anybody got close, he would just kind of look at them, and he wouldn't say anything. And as far as I heard, he had been doing this for years. He did not communicate with anybody.
Oh, sorry, you're cutting out a little bit, I think. Last thing I heard was he did not communicate with anybody. Is this only on Diamond's end, or is it? Can you guys hear me? So I can't hear you at all, Diamond.
First responder. And then he found a wife or something. Like his family had died in that, and that's why he was just despondent and had no hope in life. That was the rumor. Who knows if it's true?
Hey, dude, sorry. You cut out for quite a bit. Yeah. You were talking. So the last thing I remember was that it was just I think it was your internet connection. Everyone's saying they can hear me. Last thing I remember is you were saying about how Richard, when he was in his chair, he wouldn't, no one would talk to him, and if you went up to him, he would look at you funny, and he'd been doing that for years. I think that was the last thing we really heard. Oh yeah. So yeah, could you try and go back, because it was obviously really interesting.
Yeah, well, it's basically just a room, because nobody knew. You couldn't get any information from him. But the only rumor that I ever heard about why he was that way is that he had been a first responder in the Oklahoma bombing, and that his family had died, or his wife or something had died in that, and that's why he was despondent.
Oh my God!
Probably just something somebody made up. Sounds like something I would, if I wanted to just make up something funny, I'd probably do that. But the reason why I say it's made up as well is that there's plenty of other people, even at that same shelter, who were equal. Well, they weren't that despondent. They weren't just completely vegetative, but they were in that same category of, they had no hope, they had no friends, they had no family, they had no prospects. The only thing that they had going for them is they'd be waiting for either a disability or for Section 8. But they didn't even have much hope of getting that. Like they had moved beyond the point where they were.
Sorry, what's Section 8?
So Section 8 is a fable. It's nothing more. It's also just a rumor. Apparently, the government or maybe Oklahoma, somebody will give you like a house, or they'll give you like some like kind of like really low income housing option if you are like destitute. I don't know. I've never.
Okay.
Everybody who I've ever heard talk about it are like, nobody knows anybody who actually has Section 8 that I ever met. It's apparently you'll be in a waiting list for like just an infinite amount of time, years and years and years. So they were waiting for that because supposedly you could get a permanent living situation. I don't know. That's all I can say about that. Apparently it exists, but in such low, meager numbers, that it's classic just U.S. It's classic U.S. Policy towards the homeless where, well, who knows? Maybe it's an actual holdover, though. Maybe it was actually once a good policy and it's just been slashed to bits. Like, who can say? I guess I would have to look more into it, but it's such a small little nothing burger. Theoretically, it could give you some hope, but again, these people have been homeless for so long. They've been without social contact for so long. Like this is their existence now. They're institutionalized, you could say, whether they're on the street or in a shelter, because they're in both places. And also disability. So this was more realistic. Like some of them were waiting for disability, but again, like the waiting time, it's in the years. Like you're waiting for many months, if not just Many people there had been waiting for years already, and then you could just get rejected after years. Like, so who knows? So again, it was just kind of, they were waiting for that. If anything, you got the impression that, so for example, here's another person like this was, what was even this guy's name? So I'm going to mention some of these people. Names are something that, it's funny. I can't remember a lot of these names because we didn't really use names. Like, if you think about the way names get used in normal life, like think about the way you use a person's name. Like if you're at the job with somebody, it's a coworker, then you'll use somebody's name because you need to refer to them. Maybe you're talking about them, and because everybody's got like a specific job they do. So maybe you're talking about some job related stuff that they do, or you're trying to convey some information and you need to use their name to pick out that you're talking to them. So that's one way that you use names. You don't, if you're homeless, this is not an aspect. If you're off the job, for example, then you might be using social media and you'll see their name, or they'll be in your phone, you'll see their name there, or you'll like be hitting them up to do something fun. You'll use their name there. Like when you're homeless, you just don't do any of this. Like you don't actually, there's not really any kind of intentionality with the social interactions. You don't really have much reason to be talking to one another because nobody has any social capital to give anybody else, and everybody is so underwater with their own issues that they can't spare much sympathy, and that often their mental bandwidth is already taken up. So there's just like, I'm not saying that there aren't friends. Like there are something that at least resembles friendship between some of these homeless people, but it's just kind of funny that some of these folks who I really liked, I quite like and still remember quite strongly, I don't even know their names. Maybe I don't even know if I ever knew their names. So this guy, anyway, he was this big black guy who's very kind of sludge-like. And a lot of these folks in the despondent category are very sludge-like. Like their bodies are kind of just, they look like they're melting because they don't see any reason, they don't see much reason to get out and do things. They just don't. They don't see much reason to it. So their bodies will just kind of melt. So this guy, though, at least had some reason. He was in a wheelchair, and he was like kind of a blob, and he had one leg. He might have been a veteran. I don't know. And so his job at the shelter was he would be at the front desk, and he was like a front desk, like an attendant, and he would check people in and out and stuff like that. Some minor administrative work. This guy was a fucking dick. This is like one of the biggest assholes I've ever met. Because that's also something you'll see in this, because they don't care anymore. They're just they don't they don't like themselves. They don't like you. They don't see the point of any kind of social interaction at all. This guy was just a total asshole. He would just wheel around with a scowl on his face at all times. He was obviously extremely unhappy. He would just, in his leisure time, he would sometimes just kind of just sit there in his wheelchair. Like, what's the point of doing anything? You know, nobody liked him and he didn't like anybody. And you just got the impression, I think he was waiting on, once again, like maybe he might have even had disability already and he was just waiting for Section 8, I guess. So you got the impression that he was just waiting for that or waiting for death, and he probably didn't care which one it was. And that's kind of what you see at this point is this is where hope falls away. And at this point, they're just not getting out. They're just not. Like, it doesn't care. I don't care what the macro economy is doing. There's no coming back once you get down here. Because again, they just have, like, even if you changed their mentality, like, they don't have any skills. They don't have any, their body is not even capable of doing much. Like, and they just objectively don't have anything. I'm sorry. They're just so fucked. It's crazy. And there's a lot of them too. There was probably, at this shelter I was at, there was probably like 30 to 40% of, I'm going to guess like 25 to 40% of the people at the shelter in the bottom half, in the normal half, the non-drug addicts, they were despondents. They were in this category where you just didn't get the sense that there was any hope at all for them. And then, so the only taxonomy below this one's a bit dismissive. I can't really say too much about this one. I just call this category the wild ones, because these are street dwellers who cannot possibly be sorted into any category because their mental illnesses are too extreme and diverse. So these are the ones who you'll pass on the street and they will just be shouting. They'll be talking to God, I guess. And, they'll be aphasiacs. Only half the words they say make any or even words. And they'll be like preaching about something, and they'll just carry long conversations with themselves. And, there'll be people who don't exhibit any outward signs really, but are obviously have extreme mental issues, like extraordinary mental issues that you'll see doing all kinds of shit, or that you'll just see kind of walking aimlessly. Like, I think most, it's hard to say, right? Because I was at the shelter, so there wasn't even that much, there's not that much crossover between, people in this type and the ones I was with at the shelter. Because anyone in this type gets kicked out of shelters. Like, they just can't exist in any kind of shelter. They'll get kicked out. Like, these ones, they're never going to recover on their own, I don't think. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's possible, but there's nothing to help them. There's no mental health services that are ever going to take them in. The cops don't give a fuck. I was there. So this kind of thing happened more than once, where I was, I'd be sitting at a bus stop waiting on a bus to take me to either an interview that was some hopeless interview, or maybe later on, maybe it's my actual job, some actual job I had. And some lady who was dressed strangely would come up to me, and she was like maybe, in this case, like 45 maybe. And she had a smile on her face, and she was very friendly, and she was holding something. She held it out to me, and she said, "How did you find this?" Like, it's not mine. I don't even know what it was. It was like a piece of garbage. And she kind of tilted her head and was like, and I was like, holy shit. And then she walked off and started doing some other stuff with somebody else. And I saw a female police officer walking along, because there's a police presence in these areas where homeless people turn up, of course. And I ran over to the officer, and I was like, hey, I pointed, I was like, I think this lady needs some help. Like, this lady needs some help of some kind. And this female officer glanced that way And then without even looking back at me, she keeps walking to her police vehicle and says, they're all like that. And this is the response. And you can't blame them, because what the hell is a cop going to do? Like, these people are extremely disturbed in many cases, and they cannot be helped by any institution that exists in Oklahoma, or probably in the country at large. And, you know, I don't know what to say about that, because, you know, not everybody on the street has mental illness, of course, but more than half, I think. It's a high number, and or maybe their mental illness is not so pronounced. And, you know, they'd form camps, and extremely filthy camps, and those would get swept away. And the locations of the camps would be, as far as I could tell, a bit of a guess, but they would be some kind of triangle. It would be in the proximity of the different meal locations that churches would serve. Because if you're not in a shelter that's giving you food, then you have to be fed by the churches. So there was probably 5 or 6 different locations that I knew of around Oklahoma City where like a church group would feed the homeless at certain days of the week. And so you would learn that schedule. And so this is one of the big problems if you're on the street, is that obviously you might starve, but the kind of the base level problem is that you have to spend so much time just like walking between these different points of interest to get food. So it's like a huge time sink, just moving around like that, trying to get around, because there's no transportation. So America and public transportation, you probably already know they don't talk to each other too much. So in Oklahoma City, there's one bus network, which thank God that exists at least. But even that costs money. So if you're homeless, you're not going to have any money, so you can't do that. It's like $175 last I checked here. Well, there's two kind of issues with it. One is that there's a cost. So the fact that there's any cost means that you can't do it. I was at a shelter, and again, it was supported by the government in some way, or maybe the state government. So they would actually give you money for the bus if you needed it to get to some job. But obviously, if you're not there, you cannot use the bus at all, unless you beg for the money, I guess. Unless you get a little bit of money, but it's going to be a recurring expense, so it's not even going to help you. Anyway, but the other problem with the bus system is that it's all the way it's planned. Everything's connected to one central point, so there's not much cross contact between different streams or different strands. So in other words, there's really no correlation between distance and how long it's going to take you on the bus. So if you need to get somewhere that's literally like 2 miles away, it could take you 2 hours on the bus, because it has to go all the way to the center and then all the way back. Anyway, so I guess this is a related problem, not just with homelessness, but with just working class life in general, is that if you don't own a car, you are just so insanely fucked.
No, but I mean, it's just interesting how literally every single institution seems to combine to create this problem and intensify it, right? So it's like, the police aren't going to help you, the transport system isn't going to help you, the employment system and jobs aren't going to help you, the housing system obviously isn't going to help you, like all of this, along with other things, right? It just all combines, and this is like just the sharp end of like everything, it seems. And as you go more down your categories, you feel it more and more. You feel like the sharp end of literally every institution that we live under.
Yeah, there's two sides to it. One is that you as a person have a lot of, we haven't even talked about this so much, but there's some disadvantages that you yourself have, and plus also variance. You might have just been unlucky as well on top of your vulnerability. And then the other side is that there's no recourse. Like once you're down here, there's no recourse. There's no institution that's going to help backstop you or help you. In my case, the only one was this shelter itself. So the shelter itself did help me, right? That doesn't help you necessarily get out of it, especially once you've been there a while. You get kind of once you start losing your hope, it's kind of a downward spiral.
By the way, Connor actually in chat was just asking if you could like maybe describe a shelter for somebody who's actually never really seen one, like what's it actually like inside? What's it like to sleep in and so on?
So why was it the best one? So, because again, there's just one. So this is where the money went. So mine actually, it was pretty cleanly. There's a few things to mention about it. So again, there's actually quite a bit to talk about. So there's the two big common rooms. Let's not talk about the upper part where the drug addicts were, but I'll just talk about where I was for simplicity. So there's the two big common rooms. There was like a TV, but they didn't turn it on. I guess they didn't want us to be too entertained or something. And then there was the bedding area, and there was like the 50 beds, and they were all, it was like a barracks, and there were also fans that ran because it would smell too bad otherwise, I guess. So a couple things. One is we cleaned everything ourselves. So this was actually quite nice. It was a bit nice. It was a bit face saving. It would have been way too humiliating if like some volunteers came in and cleaned everything for us. But we spent, I can't remember the exact time, but it was like 3 to 5 hours a day. We'd have our various chores, and then we'd clean and kind of keep things up. So, for example, I would clean the windows, and I would sweep the floors, and I would clean like chairs and tables, and then I would go upstairs to the drug addict area, and I'd do a lot of cleaning there as well. So it would take like 3 to 5 hours. So funnily enough, we all had part-time jobs. That's the funny part. We were all working like maybe 20 hours a week just from that, just from upkeeping our living area, which, was nice. And especially the ones who worked in the kitchen, because they provided meals there, which was very good. The ones who worked in the kitchen definitely had full like part-time jobs. Like they were, because the kitchen's always food related industry is always the hardest. So they had a lot of work to do there. So, just to give you an idea of the schedule, we wake up in the morning. You had to wake up by a certain time, I guess. And then they served 3 meals. They served 3 meals a day. So this was the big benefit. And I should mention that this was the men area. There was another area that was for women and children, and never the twain shall meet. Like I don't think I ever saw a child myself, even though they definitely existed there. And there was maybe one person that I knew of there who had a wife on the other side. And so we'd wake up and we'd have breakfast, and then we'd do our shift where we'd do all the cleaning and stuff. And then the other nice thing they had here was a computer lab for, just for doing job applications online. So after that, because you had a required amount they required you to look for work. So after that, you would either go to the computer lab to do applications there, or in my case, I would go to the library and I would do applications from the library. And by the way, if you're on the street, if you're not in a shelter, the library is all you have. Like the library is it. I don't even know if there was no library and you couldn't use the computers to look for work, I honestly do not know what you would do. I don't know what you would do because you don't even have a phone. Like how are you going to find a job ever? But also a lot of people are illiterate. This is the other thing. I don't know what percent was because you never recognize at the time. Nobody ever makes it clear that they can't read. They never telegraph it. They hide it. You never know. Even in normal life, there's people you probably know right now who can't read. Well, I guess you specifically are. You're kind of middle classish, so maybe not you. But if you're working class, you probably know people who can't read, and you won't know. You will never recognize it. And so these people, it's kind of fucked up for them because they can't use the job sites. That's the big deal. They can't use the job sites because they can't read the information. Even if they can read to some level, these job sites. Have you seen these? Look at Indeed.com. Just go around and look around on Indeed.com. Look at the information density. It's insane. It's small text. There's all these numbers. There's all these letters. You're scrolling around. There's so much information. You just can't.
I think,
So,
one of the things that's quite frustrating about that, and it goes back to something you said earlier, is obviously most of it's just bullshit as well, right? Like most jobs are pretty
yep.
simple once you pick them up, but I think that's probably gotten worse over time as well. The inflation of duties and titles and all that kind of stuff that obviously completely rules out these illiterate people, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't do the job. Like it's just nonsense. So it's like a completely artificial barrier.
There's very few jobs that require literacy at the end of the day, even the ones that you would think would. It's kind of funny. Like literacy itself is actually, in a way, kind of overrated. You don't really need it that much to get through life at a basic level and to succeed. And yet, you're kind of gated out if you don't have it because society is built in such a way, it's built for the literate. So if you're not in that group, you're not even considered. Like, it's really bad. And as far as degrees themselves, it's kind of the same story. For example, my current job, there's this one guy who's like a low-level manager, super hard worker. It's like, he's like a classic good old boy type. Likes to work a lot. He's like a managerial type. Okay, cool. He told me about some of his job history. He could not become department head he could not manage the department at Walmart. They wouldn't let him, even though he was super qualified and a super hard worker and was like pretty good at managing people because he doesn't have a college degree and they require that. And he's been blocked out like a couple times from that. And he's probably going to get blocked again here. Like he just doesn't have a degree, so he gets blocked at a certain level. It's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, and I've run into that too because technically I don't even have a degree. I have like 99% of a BA. Pretty funny. We can talk about that at some point as well. But
Okay.
It's kind of strange. Like I wanted to be an electrician at one point when I was homeless. I was like, "Oh, electrician! I've heard that's a good job." And I heard I don't even know how I heard it, but I heard that you could become an electrician without experience. They'll make you an apprentice. Like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no. Whoever told me that was lying. The first thing they ask is how many years experience do I have? Like everything just requires experience. You really do have to kind of start at the bottom. The only way you can get into it, there's like a whole category of freaking jobs where maybe theoretically you don't need experience, but you do need a social in. Like you need somebody there who can give you an in at the company or at the job, or else you'll just never get started. If you don't have a social in, because once you're down here, you just don't have any kind of social capital at all. So there's all of those jobs. You just can't even get your foot in the door. Like you really are looking at a relatively small set of service jobs. And also, we can talk about this as well. Gig on the topic of jobs is, I mentioned it earlier. So gig work and temp work, especially gig work. So at some point I started working for me, I became a stage crew member. So I was building stages at Chesapeake Energy Arena, which is like this big, it's in downtown Oklahoma City, and it does comedy shows and games and, whatever, big audiences. So I would build stages for like bands. And I was getting paid $12 an hour, which was fucking insane to me. I was like, "Oh, that's so much money. That's insane money." Anything above like $9 an hour was like super, super high tier. I was like, "Wow, that's a lot of money." So this is some gig work that I got. I don't remember how I got it, but I got my foot in there and I started doing that. So paid well. Problem is it's gig work. So you only got to, you only built the stage and you took it apart if there was an event. And that was, not that frequent. It was kind of, it wasn't steady, of course. And it wasn't really that many hours either. So I did that. And then I also cleaned the stadium. It was like a basketball stadium or something. I can't even remember. But I would clean the stadium as well. It was like a different job as well. So these are two different like gig works. And so together my income was like not that bad. It was probably good enough to get an apartment. And I did this type of work for quite a while. Probably the last I don't even know how many months at the end I was doing this type of work. And I didn't have any expenses. So all the money just went into my bank account. And so at a certain point, I had a lot of money, more money than I've ever had since, like at one time. Because nobody ever has, if you've looked at the numbers, nobody has savings. Like whether they're homeless or not, like nobody has fucking savings at all. So I had like $2,500 at one point. And I was like, wow, I've never had this much money. This is a crazy amount of money. And this is the funny thing is that people might not understand this, but when you're homeless, money doesn't even help you that much. It's kind of hilarious because, so here's the thing. People, you're familiar with, diminishing marginal utility theory of money, where the more money you get, the less it helps you. So, the classic example being if a billionaire gets $100,000, they don't even notice. Whereas if you get $100,000, it changes your whole life. So that's generally true, but I think what people neglect is that, or don't realize, is that the utility curve itself kind of depends on your class. So when you're homeless and you're in this state of privation, the curve itself is not, it alters. It's not like it's not a straight diminishing marginal utility curve of money like you typically get. It's more like the first bit of money is insanely useful, like up to, I don't know, maybe a couple $100, and then it starts kind of like becoming not that useful because there's not that much you can get that helps you. It's kind of funny. And also because no amount of money can get you an apartment. This is the other thing. I could not get an apartment ever with these jobs, even though I made like a decent amount of money on them. I could not get any. It was not possible to get an apartment with these jobs because they were the people who manage these apartments aren't dumb. They know that this is gig work. This is gig work / temp work. So they can't rely on that income. So they can't rely on you giving them their money for their apartment. So they will not approve you for the apartment. So I had all this money and nothing. I literally had nothing to do with it. I was like, what the hell can I do with this money? I would just like I would buy food, and like I bought some earbuds at one point, and also I bought like a $700 motorized desk, which I'm currently using. I was homeless and I bought a $700 motorized desk and sent it to my friends for when I became not homeless anymore. I was like, well, I've got like hyperactive legs, so when I get back to trying to write my novel or like work on my game, I'll want this motorized desk so I can stand up. Like, this did not help me at all at the moment, but I had nothing else to do with my money.
You just didn't know what else to buy. That's insane.
There was nothing. So the curve looks like it's like imagine a 2D curve, a graph. It's like a super hard, sharp spike at the beginning, and then it just like levels off. And then it just hard levels off. Yeah. And then at some point, maybe it goes up a little bit again. Yeah. It's just like,
I guess if you get like literally $1 million, then it would be helpful. But
at some point, obviously it does matter. And it depends on your situation. It's not going to be the same for everybody because some people have families and or debt or whatever. So it does vary. But the curve itself will vary. But it's not like a standard diminishing utility curve. And anyway, the point is, in this case, I was just at a certain point, I had more than enough money, and I was just waiting to try and get a steady job. That's the thing I needed. I needed a steady job that I could use on an application for an apartment, and they would actually give it to me. That's how you get out of homelessness. And it took quite a while for that. I eventually, the way I ended up eventually getting out of it is I got through a temp company, and I got this plastic job. And to get to the plastic job, just as a note, I had to walk 40 minutes to get to the bus, and then I had to get on the bus at like midnight, or no, I had to get on the bus at like 11 p.m. or maybe it was midnight or something. I can't even remember. And then the bus, it was a 1 hour bus trip, and I had to get out of the bus, and I had to walk for another hour to get to the job. And I started it in like the middle of the night or whatever. And I worked for 8 hours, and I did the whole thing in reverse. And at that, I was so mind broken at that point that this like 2.5 hour one-way commute, so 5 hours total, I was like, this is awesome. I was like, I have a job. Like, what the hell? It's like stable, and I get 5 days a week. This is crazy good. Like, I was so mind broken at that point that it was like, this is good. Like, this is actually awesome.
Oh my God.
And it was in winter too. It was like freaking. It was actually in the middle of winter, so it was snow on the ground. It was hilarious. But anyway.
So I would like to think, because we haven't we've been chatting for an hour and about basically your experience of being homeless, but we haven't actually really spoken about how it happened, right? And you said that this is something that you wanted to speak about a bit, and you mentioned foster care as well beforehand. So I was wondering if we could go into that.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about my early life. Not even really to complain, because my early life was like bad, but it's not that bad. No, compared to a lot of stuff you'll hear. But I think it's illustrative because there's like almost a direct line that you can trace between it and the vulnerability which caused me to end up, going homeless. And because leftists like to think, leftists are accustomed to thinking, oh, bad early life sets you up for bad outcomes later. They know this is true, but they often aren't very concrete with it. Like, I'm going to be concrete with it. I'm going to tell you that there's like 2 very specific reasons. There's 2 specific ways that you get that predict your failure that will set you up. And I'm going to kind of work up to telling what those are. Anyway, it started how all bad early life start with an abusive stepdad. So, physical abuse, whatever. Nothing sexual though, so not that bad. Okay. Eventually that goes away, and then I'm just with my mom, who is also abusive, but only when she's drunk. And she would go on rants about how Germans are superior. And because I guess we're German. I don't know. And
oh God.
Eventually I had 2 brothers at one point, but they disappeared. Yeah, or 2 half brothers, I guess.
And you don't know what happened to them. You don't know anything about them.
Never heard about them since.
Okay.
So eventually, I get yoinked by child services out of that situation, which I was at the time. I was like kind of happy about it. I was like, okay, this is good, I guess. And I don't even know what my age was. It was maybe between 8 and 10, is how old I am at this point. And then I go into foster care. And foster care is, I don't know how they vet these families because, so the average foster care family, at least in Oklahoma, I don't know. I assume it's going to be pretty similar in different states. It's going to be very different in different countries, obviously. But there's 2 things. Like the average stay length, I was taken in and out of so many families. The average stay length felt like maybe 2 to 3 months on average. Maybe I'd be in and out. And then the actual families themselves were they would always have, like the average amount of kids that they had in my experience was like maybe 3 to 4. So they already had like a whole farm of kids there, whoever this family was. And that would just be like the latest acquisition. And they'd be different levels of. So there was, man, where do I even start with this shit? Maybe a question would help. You have a question about foster care?
Well, I was wondering, do they get money for it? Is that why they're like just, acquiring so many children? Is it like something like that?
Likely.
Yeah.
But obviously they didn't tell me anything about it, and I didn't see any of it. And presumably they had to get some money for me to take care of me. So,
this might seem like a question with an obvious answer, but did they pay you any attention?
Overall, no, not really. So it did vary, but overall, definitely not. And here's the real kind of important part is over time, I just became because it's going to be hard to convey this to people who've never been through it, but I'll give you an example. So there was this Christian family who lived kind of rural. They lived outside the city, I guess. And they were like a good, they had like a decent income, decent wealth. I guess they own their own property. They had like two others already, and I would be the third one. And we went in, sat at a desk, and they told me, we have we go to church, we live a church-based life, we're Christian, and we do routine. We have a routine structure. We have a structured kind of life routine that we go through. I was like, okay, sure. So I go there. It's kind of nice. It's kind of fun. They immediately take me out and have me shoot a gun. They have me shoot like a turtle. It was like a random turtle. They're like, shoot that turtle. They're like, okay, I shot the turtle, killed it. They're like, what do you feel about shooting that turtle? I was like, yeah, it's okay. They probably don't want to do it again, but it's fine. Okay, so then I would go back in, and they have like a Wii. They had like a Wii entertainment system.
Oh, yeah.
And, I'm feeling kind of better. These people seem friendly. And, okay, we play like a Wii game. The dad and I play like a Wii game. Like some kind of tank game. We're like shooting each other with tanks, and I'm like having a blast, and I'm like owning him. And, that was fun. And then that night, the other kid, who just happened to be my age, which is not common, because the kids are always like you can't even really make friends with the other foster kids because the ages are so diverse. But in this case, this other boy was about my age. And so we're in this dark room where we have different beds, and we can't really see each other, and we just start talking. We talk about our lives and stuff, and we kind of open up. And I can't really remember exactly what we talked about now, of course, but it was very kind of heartfelt. And my heart kind of opened up. I'm like, oh, this place is cool. This place is like maybe a good place for once. And then the next day, the DHS vehicle pulls up, and they tell me to get in.
Oh.
And I already know what this means. And I get in the car with the expression probably a death row inmate has. And I just look out the window at like the dad and some of the people as they kind of recede into the distance. And
oh my God. Jesus Christ. And you were just there for one night.
Just one day. And I went back, and it just was probably the second most desolate I've ever felt in my life. The first was yet to come. And I remember just sobbing and telling like the DHS worker, who probably had to come in on a weekend or whatever, because there was nobody else there on that day. I was like, nobody wants me. At this point, like I'd already been through various places at this point, or various, homes. But this was the first time where it was like, dude, actually, nobody wants me. It's true. Like nobody, because it was obviously based on me, because they tested. It was literally it was a test run. They test run me. They didn't like me. They put me back. And the DHS worker is like,
do you get any like feedback, or like, or is it just
you never hear anything. You never hear anything.
Just
about
nothing
at all.
Just nothing.
And once you leave a house, you never see those people again or hear from them ever. No, not the people. If you happen to make any friends, that's it. They're gone. The parents never contact you. Nobody ever keeps up with you. Well, even if you had like kind of a decent, even if they were kind of nice to you, that's just the end of it. It's a total period. And so fast forward, this happens more times, and I just become so off of it. Like I don't feel anything anymore. I don't try to make friends anymore. I don't try to communicate with these parents. I don't try to get to know anybody. There's no point to doing that. Like it's just going to be over in a second anyway. I don't try to make friends at school because I'm just going to go to a different school. I don't try to get good grades. Why? Like my grades are just fucking terrible at all points. Like I'm getting D's all the time. In fact, there's a hilarious story, because at one point, because I'm very troubled in school, so the therapist like has me take an IQ test. Probably I don't know what for. Maybe to see if I need special ed or something. And so I take the IQ test, and she gets back, and she probably told me what the number was. But I didn't like her, so I didn't listen to what she said. I don't know what the number. I never knew what the number was. I didn't listen. But she was really impressed, and she asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I just pulled something out of my ass based on what I was like, oh, I like Albert Einstein. So I said particle physicist. I said I want to be a particle physicist, because math is, math is like the symbol for intelligence.
Yeah.
So that seems like a good thing to me. And she's like, oh my God, we have someone like this at our school. We got to get you into it like an advanced class right away. We got to get, this is amazing. We have someone in an Oklahoma school. She was like so amazed because I guess she was very open about thinking that Oklahomans were morons.
Yeah.
And so there was an AP physics class. So she got me into an AP physics class.
Wow.
And it was like a college level class, I guess. And she was like, oh, you got to take this kid. You got to take he needs to be in here right away. And all of this, and then I like almost immediately flunk out. Almost immediately. Well, like I ended up like, because it was a homework based class. I didn't do homework. I could not do homework. So, but I did fine on the test. So I ended up getting by with like a D, which was normal. And the therapist fucking never talked to me after that.
Oh, God.
We avoided each other in the hallways. And that was the end of that. And that's the kind of thing that happens. And anyway.
It just makes you, well, first callous, right? But also, to use one of your words, like despondent, right? It's just like you're just not willing to engage with the system that's treated you so poorly because you just don't think there's any point, even if you have the capability in theory.
Not exactly. It's more specific than that.
More specific,
here's the way that it sets you out. Here's the way that you get fucked. Because let's say you get to 18, you come out of the foster care system.
Yeah.
There's relevant to this part, at least, there's two things. One is, as I've described, hopefully you've gotten a sense now that you lose the willingness and the ability to accumulate social capital. You cannot, you end up with no friends. Like you lose the willingness to gain friends. You lose the willingness to gain connection with the people that you're living with even. So when you come out of this, there's two things. One is you're not going to have any social capital to begin with. So the people you are living with, you probably haven't even been living with for that long. So they're not really they don't have a deep connection with you. You don't have, if you have friends, you haven't known them that long anyway. Probably not that deep anyway. So this is the first thing is that you start with very low or even no social capital. You start with that. However, the other thing is that you don't have the ability to gain it either. You've lost the willingness to gain it because a normal person, let's even say a normal working class person, we're not even talking middle class. Okay. So a normal working class person with working class parents who have worked in a factory all their life or whatever. Okay, so they turn 18. What do they have? They have a couple of parents, let's say a couple of parents even. Or, in this example, we'll say a couple of parents who love them, who want the best for them, and who have accumulated resources because of the life cycle. Even though they're just working class, because they're later in their life cycle, they have more resources. They have just an income, and they have actual assets. So you've got our deep relationship with these people, your parents. There's going to be other kind of auxiliary family members, maybe aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, who you also have relationships with, who also are going to be in various stages of the life cycle. Maybe they have resources, but they're also just going to have their own jobs, and they're going to be able to offer you maybe ins or maybe advice. Maybe they can help you out, whatever it is. You're also going to be, because you've been living in this place, you're going to have some friends built up, maybe at school. There's maybe going to be some business owners who you've maybe done a summer job with or whatever. Maybe the people at the church, You've got all this social capital but it's very dependent, right? Because not everybody's going to have this even in the working class. If you've been with a family that moves a lot, you're probably not going to have a lot of this. But at any rate, for narrowly, just to focus on what I was saying with foster care, you don't even have any of this. Like you don't have a relationship with the people you live with or friends or anything. And I think what's even more important, and again, this is the stage of your life where you can get the most leverage out of resources. So you just start with fucking nothing. You start with nothing. You can't leverage the resources of anybody you know. You have no social capital. Nobody can help you. Nobody will help you because you just don't have anything. But on top of that, again, it's not even that your social skills are bad, although they are also probably bad. Your social skills are also probably bad, but it's not. It's more than that. It's that you don't have you have been taught that there's not really much point in forming relationships. So you're not going to spend energy to form relationships. You're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
You're going to be strongly biased against that behavior. And so what this means is not only do you start with very little to no social capital, but it means that in the future, you are very unlikely to have social capital at any given point in the future. So this is the main predictor. In my opinion, this is the primary predictor to your vulnerability to homelessness, because you just have no recourse at any time. You have no backstops. You have no social recourse to anybody who can help you. Because there's kind of two elements to social capital, right? There's the proactive side and there's like the insurance side. The proactive side is that people who are later in their life cycles can give you maybe not advice for one, but also they can just kind of direct you in different ways that can be beneficial to you. They can give you ins at their job, like I already mentioned. They can tell you about job openings. They can tell you the strategies that have worked for them for getting jobs, different things like that. So these are the proactive, and they can also just literally help you with money, like just straight up. So these are all the proactive benefits where you're getting both material and immaterial resources from your relationships. And then there's the insurance side where they can come in and help you when you need help the most.
Yeah.
When variance goes sideways and you're in a bad place. So you don't have if you don't have social capital, you don't have either of these things. I just don't think people even understand how big of a deal this is, because like, if I could go back in time and I had to choose between having a stable family or having like $300,000 in cash when I turned 18, I think it's like not even close. I think the family is it's worth so much more. Like, I don't even think 300,000 is like even, I think it had to be like $1 million or more before maybe the money starts becoming correct. Because you just get so much. You get so much. It's like an insurance policy that applies to everything for life, and it's free. Like, what the fuck? On top of everything else.
And it's not just finance. It's not just financial, is it, as well?
No.
Obviously, the money will only, by definition, bring you money. There's more to having the social ties as well.
Yeah, even just having job ends is like worth insane amounts. It's just worth so much. And here's something separate on top of all that. Which is, I call it like soft habits. So knowing how to take care of your teeth, knowing how to clean your clothes, how to wash your clothes, knowing how taxes work on a basic level, how to do taxes, knowing how to appraise the quality of different items that you might want to buy. These are the types of things that you will probably be lacking. You're just going to probably be lacking all these stuff. And you saw that you would see this in the shelter as well. Like, everybody had horrible teeth, for example. People didn't take care of their teeth, and they were eating unhealthily because they didn't have these soft skills. Because because in general, they started life out badly. And so they even now, even though many of them were later in life, they didn't have a lot of these like skills that seem small on their own, that are kind of a big deal together, and that you don't really think about having or possessing, but that make life quite a bit harder when you don't have them. So like, even I'm 29, and I just this year figured out what the different settings on a washer are for. I just like a few months ago figured out what the difference between cold water and like warm water is on a washer. It turns out it's kind of a big deal.
It's pretty crazy because it's such a small thing to have explained to you by somebody, right? In principle, my mum or dad probably explained that to me like once or twice, like once and then reminded me. Probably didn't take that long, but just like, if you're not even given that on top of all the other, 100, 1,000 soft skills that you need, right? It's just just all builds up, and you can miss it, and then that's a big deal.
And even, let's say that you weren't even listening the first or the second time to your parents talking about the washer.
Yeah.
Let's say you didn't like your parents, you didn't even listen. Okay, but later in life, there's going to come a point when you're like, maybe I should know about this washer. And you're going to remember that your parents talk to you about it, and you're going to remember. Or I should actually turn that around. I should say at some point later in life, you're going to remember on some level that they talked to you about it, and you're going to remember that like this is something worth knowing, and then you can look into it yourself. So when you lack those soft skills, those foundations completely, like I'm mentioning, you don't even have that. So you'll never even know necessarily what you don't know or what's because you just don't know what's important. You don't know what's important because that's the thing. That's also what's getting communicated to you in this washer example is you might not have been paying attention to the specifics of the information, but what still got through to you on some level, even if you didn't notice at the time, is you were being communicated about the like relative importance of something. And that you will still remember. That'll still be in there and it'll help you later in life. But when you start out in this, when you start out with no guide and no family or no, like the start is so bad like this, or maybe it's a family, but it's like just very dysfunctional or whatever, you wind up with no hierarchy of what's important and what's not. And this puts you at risk for like, not only obviously the skills you're missing might hurt you, not having them, but also, I don't know, it ends up making you prey for a lot of mental biases that you wouldn't otherwise be vulnerable to, in my opinion. But I don't want to get too into the weeds about that. But this also is to do with, because leftists like to talk about socioeconomic categories, right? And how they predict how you're going to do later on, like middle class versus working class. For example, if you start out poor, then you're probably going to have worse life outcomes forever. It's predictive in that way. And if you start out middle class with a middle class family, that's going to reflect positively on your chances and so on and so forth. And they like to talk about this, but there's something separate from that, which is correlated with it. Don't get me wrong, but it's independent. And I call it just like guided. I call it like guidedness. So I'll give you an example of somebody who I knew who was poor and working class, and all the inferior life outcomes were predicted from that. However, ended up like with a good result because of guidedness that came in at the last second. So this guy I knew was called Danny. I worked fast food with him, and he was 17 at the time. He was working fast food. And he had like an abusive stepdad too that beat him with belts and all that. And a lot of abuse, a lot of bitterness and anger and emotional issues and so forth, the typical stuff. And at some point he got out of that, spent some time like a military school, and got the idea that he wanted to go to the military. Okay. So he gets in the military, but it turns out he was cutting, he had all these bad issues. They wouldn't let him join the military because of the cutting and the mental risk. Apparently they have standards like that. But anyway, okay, so now he's working fast food. He is probably not going to college. He started out very poor and he's still poor. So like his life's going to turn out like shit, is it not? However, his grandparents who took him in, his grandpa was a wastewater specialist. So he treated water at a plant his whole life. And currently at that time, he was doing wastewater for the trailer park where he lived. So Danny doesn't know what the hell he's going to do with his life. He's confused. He still wants to go to the military, but it's not going to happen. It's not looking good for him. But his grandpa coaches him on wastewater management, has like old books he still has about wastewater, has old like test booklets and stuff about what to expect on the exam that they give you to get your wastewater license. So he coaches Danny through all of this and starts letting him manage the wastewater at the trailer park. Danny gets his license. He immediately has a job there because he takes over for his grandpa doing the wastewater at the trailer park. And then at 18, he's got that experience. He immediately gets a job at an actual wastewater plant. And it's like a well-paying job.
Yeah.
And it's like, it suits him. So and he's probably going to do well in life now. He's actually that changed everything. He's going to do well in life, and there's probably going to be a time like, I don't know, 30 years in the future, let's say, when, let's say he's like boss of the whole plant now. He's like the top dog, the top wastewater guy. He's going to pass like a homeless person on the street or whatever. And he's going to be like, well, I also started poor and I also started shitty in life, but look where I'm at through hard work. But it's like, it wasn't really, it's because he had a guided path. Like his path he got like a miracle injection at the end of like a straight guided path that was open to him. And so this is what I'm talking about, where it's not the same as socioeconomic prediction. It's like whether you get presented with a path that's guided, or whether you get nothing and you just end up like flailing around with no direction. And there's a huge difference. It's an enormous difference. And so I call it, I typically just, the terms I give to this are like guided path versus broken path. It's basically the difference between like going up Everest with a guide, like they do nowadays, where somebody will just straight up, you just have to follow this person. And not only that, they'll tell you how the physical endurance that you have to make it to Everest. They'll give you all these benchmarks. Like you need to actually be able to do this, this, and this. And here's how you can get to that point physically. And, you can do this to acclimatize your respiratory system so you can handle the Everest air. And you just have to follow this guide. And we have rest stops set up. It's like a guided path versus having to get up Everest by yourself with no guide and no information. It's a night and day difference. Because, it's so, because what's not immediately obvious, this isn't to do with homelessness specifically, it's kind of broader, but what's not obvious is that if you really only get like one chance in life, if you are poor, let's say you're working class, you really only get one chance in life to use your intelligence. You get one chance, and that is you need to go through school. Let's say you don't have like a bespoke guide who's going to make you a wastewater specialist. You need to go through school, get a scholarship, then go to college, go to university, and then whatever the degree is, you need to follow that degree into immediately getting a job in that field. And if you do that, that's like, then you can actually use your intelligence, and you can end up doing something good. If you miss that boat, if the path gets broken, where something goes wrong, maybe you can't make it to college, maybe your grades are too bad. Maybe you just can't make it to college, maybe you flunk out of college, maybe you have to start work. You had to leave college and start working because of money reasons. Once you start getting into working class life and you missed that initial boat, it's like intelligence is worthless. Like I am telling you, as an intelligent person, intelligence is fucking useless. It does not help you in working class life at all. If I could trade 14 IQ points for $14, I think it'd be a good trade. Straight up. It doesn't help you. It doesn't do anything. If you're middle class, every point of IQ, you can leverage that because you're going to end up in some place where you can use it. Entrepreneur, you can use your intelligence with your business. Medical, obviously intelligence, academia, of course, middle management, you can climb the ladder. There's just all this stuff. If you're working class, there's only two possible things you can do with your intelligence to make good on it, to try and make good on it. There's only two. One is you can try to do a side hustle. And this is so fucking hard. Like, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm making an indie game. This is like the class.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Maybe we can talk about that in a bit more depth at some point.
Well, I can definitely say some things about that. I guess to keep it categorical, there's side hustle, and then there's, I guess you could call it like industry. So this is basically like trying to climb a ladder from the bottom. Maybe you start at McDonald's and then you try to become like a franchise owner, for example. But maybe that's a bad example. If you're trying to use your intelligence, maybe would even be an example. Like maybe you start at, I don't know, maybe like a CVS pharmacy just as an associate, and you try to like just rank up and become corporate, or try to get to somewhere where you can kind of do something. This is like your more realistic shot, honestly, is doing something like that, is just trying to kind of start near the bottom and try to work your way up and maybe become some. So in the case of, let's say you wanted to make games. So the side hustle route would be trying to make an indie game, and then the legacy route would be trying to learn some coding skills and some various skills, and then trying to maybe do some freelancing work and trying to get into an industry position. Maybe you're not going to be able to just go to Blizzard, obviously, but maybe some smaller company, and then hope that they can hire you on, try to do some work there. Hopefully it's enough where you can actually do that as a living, and then try to keep going and trying to keep ranking up. So that is like the more realistic chance you have, is to try and do a strategy like that, like the industry strategy is what I would say. But even then, you're just like, it's a worse version of the guided path. It's just a strictly inferior version, because you're basically competing against the people who are doing the exact same thing you're doing, but they started much younger than you and they had a way better start. So it's possible. You can definitely do it. Many people have done it. Possible. It's strictly disadvantageous. Whereas the side hustle route, maybe there's like a better reward or something if it really works out. Like in the case of an indie game, the Stardew Valleys of the world, for example. I guess Hollow Knight's not even a good example. Trying to think of an indie game that really blew up that was made by one person. I guess Minecraft.
Power World? Was that quite an indie game? Power World.
Yeah, Power World. Except as far as I know, that kid was like kind of guided path, and he already.
He was okay. Yeah.
So, but here's the problem with the side hustle and what makes it so fucking impossible. So you have to do it while working a job, obviously, because you're working class and you got to pay the bills. So you're working full time, probably. Maybe if you cut it close, and depending on the place you live in the world, maybe you can get away with working less than full time. If you can, that's awesome, but it's also risky. So let's say you're working full time. Okay. So you work your shift and you come home and you need to work on your game in this case, or maybe it's a different kind of side hustle. Maybe you're trying to build a business or something. But indie game, like trying to make a game, is like kind of the classic at this point. A lot of people try to do it. So you come back and you work on your game, and of course it's fun for a while. So the problem is that, so let me point out the obvious. It takes a long fucking time. It's really hard because it involves a lot of different things you have to do by yourself, a lot of different tasks, different domains of knowledge and skill. And 3, the whole time that you're working on this and doing it, nobody cares what you're doing. You don't really get feedback on it. It's solipsistic. Like you're just by yourself in a box and you're just doing this thing that nobody gets going to give a shit about until it's all the way done. So it's like building a pyramid, it's like building a pyramid by yourself, but people can only see it once it's all the way done. They can't even see what you're doing in the meantime. So this requires a level of like dedication and long-termism and kind of day-to-day discipline that if you are a broken path individual, you are just not likely to have. And so the intelligence is like it's not even the bottleneck. It's not even the important part. Like you require all of these other characteristics that you're simply going to lack to some extent. I'll put it this way: to make use of your intelligence, it requires characteristics that you're just not going to have because of your background. Like intelligence is like I don't know. It's like a flavoring. It doesn't work on its own. It has to be added to something. In this case, it needs data. It needs day-to-day discipline, or you can't make good on it. So all the intelligence in the world does nothing for you. Compare that to like something like charisma, for example, or skills that are related to building social capital or networking. These are insanely fucking useful no matter what. They don't require anything else. If you have good people skills, good charisma, it doesn't matter what other kind of characteristics you have, really. Like, it's just going to help you no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter what your class is. Doesn't matter if you're middle class, working class, whatever. It's just great. Whereas intelligence, like these kind of like creative capability, maybe you're very creative. These things just don't do fucking anything. They don't do anything. They don't help you. So if you're stuck down here, like they're just worthless. They only help you at a certain level of class. Like, it's annoying. And
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of evidence on this, right? There's a lot of evidence on, for example, you mentioned like short-termism and how, there's the prevailing narrative, especially from more conservative factions, has been, of course, that poorer people tend to be more short-termist and they're poor because they're short-termist, right? But the evidence is pretty clear that it's actually like poverty causes you to be short-termist. Why? Because, why build your invisible pyramid, when you could be better off working for money now, and the invisible pyramid may not work at all, or you'd be better off, I don't know, resting or just taking care of yourself somehow, right? It's ridiculous to embark on those long-term projects without a big safety net, without a lot of social capital. So it's a reasonable response to conditions.
Yeah, that's one thing. There's also some other things that are related to that as well. But to what you just said, there's like two concrete examples in my life of that so when I was homeless, I was a philosophy student. I was getting my degree in philosophy. And so I was doing some philosophy on my own. I was trying to write my own like great book or whatever. And it was about, it's esoteric, but it was basically about like the game playing and how kind of at a micro level, kind of how the mind makes game-based decisions in a general sense. Whatever. I don't want to get into it, but I spent a lot of time on it. Spent a lot of time thinking deeply about it, both before I went homeless and while I was homeless. I was trying to write this stuff, and I had it in a notebook because I couldn't put it in a cloud or anything, so it was all in a notebook. And even on the front of the notebook, it was like my most valued possession by far, because there was all this work into it. And I wrote on the front, I was like, "This is valuable. If you find this and it's lost, here's a number for the shelter. Return it to me. I'll give you like a reward." Okay, well, guess what happens? One day it just disappears, and I never see it again. All that work was for nothing. I was, for like a month or two afterwards, I just felt so hopeless because all that work just literally disappeared.
Yeah.
I've never gotten it back, obviously, and it wasn't recorded anywhere. And that's one example. And then recently, a lot more recently, I've been working on this game for quite a while, but I was thinking, okay, well, I really cannot stand this fast food job anymore. So I'm gonna take my skills that I have making games and programming and all this stuff, and I'm gonna freelance. I'm gonna become like a actual full-time freelancer. So I put out all these applications and all this, and I get contacted about a job for an indie company that's putting together this it's like a Zelda-like game, kind of. It's like a pixel game, and I'm in the running for it. And this guy loves me. Like, he's telling me all sorts of great stuff about my portfolio and all this. And he's like, "How much would you quote for this type of service in the game, and how long do you think it would take you to do it?" And I just went ahead and did it, and plus more. I fixed bugs that were in the code. Plus, I diagrammed the whole code base. So I did all this like extra stuff, and he's eating it up. He's like, "Oh, this is freaking awesome." Well, I'm hearing all this, and I'm thinking I'm a lock for this job. So I quit my stupid fast food job, and then of course you can predict what happens here. The last second, he's like, actually turns out we gave the job to this other person at the last second. I was like, I thought I was going to get the job because, well, if we had 2 jobs, you would definitely get the second one. So what the? So now I'm scrambling, trying to make money because I got to make money for rent. And I just barely get this job. I was really close to going homeless again. Yeah, and I work at like an employee-owned company now. But that's just one example that's another example where it's just like, man, I guess it would have been better for me to just work more hours at some other fast food company other than to build all these skills that. So whatever.
I mean, it's really like, as I've been listening to you for the past, for the whole thing really, but for the past half an hour and all this stuff with social capital, what really pops into my mind is the other end of the income distribution, of the class divide, right? Because if you think about it, in the UK, we have this, it's everywhere. In the UK, it might be stronger than a lot of other places, but it's basically impossible for posh people to fail. It's impossible for them to fall into poverty. They can fuck up so much. I mean, look at Boris Johnson, right? Like, they're failing upwards, right? People call it failing upwards, right? And they can do whatever they want. They can work on whatever wacky scheme. They'll still end up being paid millions. There's absolutely no chance, because of their social connections, because of their guided path, extremely guided path, as well as various other benefits of money, that it's just impossible. And again, it's all social capital. It just seems to me. I mean, they can just phone people up that you wouldn't believe, right? They can just phone someone up, a CEO, a politician, whatever. Just get someone on the phone. Can you do me a favor, right? Any remote smidgen of hardship that there might be a little bit of hardship in the future, they can get it sorted straight away. So it's just such a big contrast, right? But it's the same thing. It's the other side of the same thing. All of this social capital.
Yeah, it's those are some extreme examples, but those are the ones that catch people's attention, even though the same thing happens on a less extreme,
of course,
on a less extreme basis at all levels of society, and it somewhat goes unappreciated because people kind of just take it for granted, even when you don't have it.
Well, it's making me appreciate what I have. I mean, I can't get politicians on the phone, but like, it's just, I do, just knowing a lot of people having like family and friends and stuff, and somebody like could lend you money, or, if you were looking for a job, they could probably help you, and just like all of these things, whether or not you're using them at any one time, you also know that you could, right? And what's the first thing you do when you have a problem? You contact someone that you know and who cares about you, right?
Yeah. So everything you just said is true. But the thing I like the most that you pointed out was that it's just the knowledge that you have that backstop. That is a big deal, because let's compare somebody who has a family. It doesn't even have to be a rich family. It can be, let's say a working class family that has some capital, and we'll help them out. They'll help them out, and then they maybe have some friends and family as well, some other auxiliary social capital as well. And so they know in the back of their mind that they have this recourse, that they're not going to just be on the street and it's not going to be a fucking disaster. Okay. So how do I put this? It basically it lets you make better. It frees you from risk-based mental biases that otherwise would have a much greater hold on your mind. And in fact, for me, do. So, because in your mind, there's your total financial welfare. There's like everything that you have, everything that's going to be at risk if you do something in your life that's unusual. For example, in my case, it was trying to become a freelancer, but it can be whatever. So in that bucket, you put everything you own, like your net worth, the money that you have in savings, the money that you could get if you like maybe some sold stuff at the last second, and then also the help that your friends or family you might could get from them if you really needed it. And so, how do I put this? The person who has the social the backstop of this social capital, because that's in the picture, it kind of shrinks by proportion the amount that's getting put at risk. So if you don't have that, then almost 100% of what you have is at risk. If you have these, let's say, just for example, it's 2 parents and a house. You've got that you can fall back on. Not everything you have is at risk, only some portion. So that lets you make decisions in like a more informed way that otherwise you would be petrified by fear to do, and that will weigh on you mentally. And man, it's just so I love that you pointed that out. And also there's another thing too, where I don't think people appreciate the differences that emerge from like the differences in mental cost that emerge between, so let's say, I don't know, let's make some numbers up. That'll make it easier to talk about. Let's say somebody makes $10,000 a year, and somebody else makes $20,000 a year. Okay, and then there's, let's say, so for me, for example, in my case, I lost my e-reader. It's nice. It's like a $120 e-reader. Okay, kind of stressful because I don't want to have to replace it. That's $120. That's a lot of money. So I have like an incentive to kind of wait, because in this case, I might find it. Maybe I'll find it and I won't have to spend the money. Or let's say it was destroyed instead of lost. Well, in that case, I still would have probably an incentive to wait, because it's $120 is painful right now. But if I save some money, some time goes by, I accrue some capital, maybe it'll be less painful at that point in the future when I have more capital, because it's relative to what I have. The cost, it's relative to what I currently have. So, but I'm also accruing. So how do I put this? So in the case of our example with 10,000 and 20,000, let's say the 10,000, they have a living expense of like 5,000. So they have 5,000 in disposable money. This is the fund out of which the 120 for the e-reader has to come in this example. Or it could be like your car, something in your car is broken. That'd be a classic example. It's like something that came up. Okay, so it's not relative to their total money. It's relative to their disposable free money, because the 5,000 is for living expenses like food, and it's like non-flexible, like rent. That's the non-flexible side. So it comes out of their, I guess, flexible funds. So the person with 20,000, their living expenses are going to be higher. It's true, because they have more money, so they'll spend more on rent and food. But it's not going to be that much higher. Let's say it's like 7,000 instead of 5,000. Okay, so they have 13,000. They have 13,000 in disposable money instead of 5,000. So that's more than double. So this is like the first point, is that somebody who has like twice as much income is more than twice as well off, because the pool of money which they can marshal is actually more than twice as much, because the fixed cost doesn't increase proportionally. So let's say I'm the 10,000 guy, and the 20,000 guy also loses his e-reader and has to pay 120 to replace it. So the amount of pain that I take by spending the 120, it's going to be proportional to my 5,000, which is my leftover money. Let's say it's 500 instead, so it's a smaller number. Whereas it's proportional to his disposable money, which is like 13,000 or say 1,300. So the pain that he takes, the mental pain from spending that money, is like less than half as much. And so this has some consequences, because that part is somewhat obvious. Here's the part that's not so obvious. Every day that goes by where I don't replace this e-reader or my car or whatever the hell it is, I incur mental cost, which is, it's like pain. It's like mental pain. So I incur a mental cost every day that this problem is not resolved. In the case of the e-reader, it's like, my habit structure is built around it. I can't read, can't do this different stuff that I do with using my e-reader. But it's true with everything. Every day that the problem is not resolved, I have a mental cost. And this is also true for the 20,000 guy. And it's going to be the same cost, because in this case, he also has his life built around his e-reader, so he also wants it. So every day that goes by, we're both incurring the same cost, but the difference is because the pain that I suffer when I replace the e-reader is higher, there's like a higher threshold of pain over time that I will accept before I pull the trigger. So this is the other consequence, is that in this guy's case, maybe let's say 6 days go by, he incurs like a mental cost, and then after that time, he's like, this is too bothersome. I'm just going to pay 120. So he just replaces his e-reader after 6 days. For me, it could be like a month of everyday mental cost, where at no point up until a month am I willing to finally pull the trigger because I've taken so much I've paid in so much mental tax. And so when you look at like the total cost of that event, of this and small unfortunate event of, like, in this case, losing the e-reader or having it be destroyed, or the piece of your car is like malfunctioning or whatever it is, like the mental cost that the poorer person takes is so much more severe. They end up paying in way more mentally to every single problem. And also because of that, the rate of problems is the same. So that means that because you have more at any one time, you're just paying more mental cost, like, at any given time, period. So you're just paying more all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, so yeah, it's like, losing your e-reader is like, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a massive pain and it's important to you. But all of these costs, right, they can add up as well. And if you're just like aware of this at all times, right, and again, that thing that it could happen, right, and you're like more scared of losing things like that, right, and then you've just got like this higher sort of default level of pain, right? Basically, of stress.
Basically, that's true. So I guess a better example would have been like, there's like a weird sound in your car, let's say. The e-reader might have been a bad example. Well, let's say it's a weird sound in your car. It's a bit more.
But that's just something that happened to you recently, isn't it? So it's like, that's why it's on your mind. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's something weird. There's some sound with it's obviously not right. It's making like a bumpy sound. Okay, so if you wanted to resolve this problem, you'd have to take your car into a mechanic. He's going to tell you something's wrong with it. So then you're going to have to pay him to fix whatever the fuck it is. So that's going to be some substantial cost. So you don't have that money, or you do, but like it's going to cause you a lot. Let's say you do have the money to pay that if you wanted to, but it's going to cause a bunch of pain. So you're going to just wait until you have more money, hopefully, because you'll hopefully accrue more money. You'll try to save some money up. Okay. So every day that goes by, here's what's going through your head. Is that sound getting worse? Is that as bad as it was? And then also, you're thinking, how much is my car do I think my car's taking damage? Like, how should I just pay it now? Should I just pay now? I know. And then you're also thinking like, what? Well, basically what I'm saying is every single day you're having to pay in mental cost, literal mental cost, every single fucking day. And then eventually you're going to pay it anyway. Whatever the cost ends up being to fix this problem, you're going to eventually pay it. So it's just extra. All of this is just like extra tax on top. It's just extra shit.
Yeah.
Anyway,
absolutely. And it applies kind of all the way up the distribution, right, to varying degrees. And there's like, the poorer you are, even relatively, the more of these costs that you incur and the bigger a deal these things are and the more you have to think about in general. I mean, you've mentioned cognitive bandwidth a few times, right? And that's like, generally speaking, cognitive bandwidth is taken up the more you go down the income distribution.
I mean, it's, from what I understand, it's like 12 to 20 IQ points functionally that you lose on top of, from the just having less mental space. And I've been in the thralls of this a few different times in my life, and it just feels like fucking inescapable brain fog. Like it feels like you just can't rationally think about anything, especially if it has a time horizon of longer than like a week. You just can't your brain doesn't work. I don't know what the fuck the problem is. And then there's something else too that if we're talking about habits,
Hmm.
because something you might see with somebody who's poor is they might spend more time than you think is appropriate watching YouTube or consuming porn or playing video games or whatever it is. And part of it is palliative, of course. How do I put this? So here's the obvious observation that many leftists will make is that because this poor person has like a worse life, they need more palliatives in the form of dopamine from YouTube videos, porn, video games, whatever it is, whatever their thing is that they do a lot, maybe TikTok. And that's true. So that part is true, but there's something less obvious as well, which is the shame. I'm someone who's felt a ton of shame in my life, because I'm just like not progressing in life like I should be. Like I guess many points in the past I've just felt like, wow, I am still stuck. I cannot fucking make progress. I feel, and I wouldn't want to meet. There've been periods in my life where I have not wanted to meet anybody who I've known previously, because if I do, I will have to confront the fact that they will see that I have not progressed in life very much. That's shameful. That's embarrassing. So I don't want to meet them. I don't want to meet any such person. Okay, so that makes sense. That's my thought process, my shame-based thought process. But also, there's a person right here who's been there since the beginning and who can still observe this shame, which is myself. Like, I can observe that I'm not progressing in life, and I don't need another person. Like, I'm also here. So to avoid that, I can avoid other people to avoid that source of social shame. But how do I avoid myself, my own gaze that confers shame from what I see in the evidence of my non-progressing life? Well, it's through distracting myself with dopamine. It's by watching YouTube and consuming porn and playing video games or watching TikTok. When I'm in the thrall of the dopamine roller coaster of performing some activity which will deliver a variable amount of dopamine, I cannot possibly be reflecting on my life and observing myself from a meta perspective. So it's the palliative explanation I mentioned, the kind of typical one, is very true. But also there's just this inherent shame where you're just not living up to your expectations, and this itself paradoxically causes a deepening, like it causes you to sink behaviorally even deeper. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, I suppose you were talking quite a lot about screens, which I suppose is quite a modern source of shame relief or dopamine, right? I guess I was thinking about addiction, and obviously people are addicted to screens, right? But I was thinking about addiction and whether there's an analogy with that. I mean, is that often...
Everything I said is also true of Zen. It's also true of, nicotine, drinking. I think rates of drinking at least have been going down, or is that even true anymore? But the rates of addiction are at all times highs. It goes without saying, because there's various forms. There's even more forms now of addiction. And the reason why I mentioned those ones, I mentioned them because they're rather innocuous. Like watching a lot of YouTube doesn't sound that bad. Playing a lot of League of Legends doesn't sound that bad. Why not? But in the back of my mind, I know that I'm supposed to be freaking writing a novel. What about the novel I was supposed to write? I'm still not doing that.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm playing fucking League of Legends again. Or I'm watching, I'm freaking binging on YouTube, or, consuming more porn. This is typical stuff that, because it goes without saying that freaking like going to an actual casino and gambling a bunch is bad. People know that. People know that that's already bad.
Yeah.
They know that drinking a bunch is bad. They know that freaking... Maybe they know nicotine's bad. I don't know. But there's an awareness. But there's like I'm just talking about just negative kind of behaviors that you enjoy in the moment, but you end up regretting and you don't actually want to be doing. The fact that you, like, your own privation relative to your expectations itself fuels these behaviors. So it's cyclical. Anyway.
I mean, how does this relate? to sort of dominant cultural narratives, because I was thinking, the idea that you should be progressing, I think that's not necessarily something, I don't know about that much about anthropology, but I don't think it's something that was common to all human societies. I don't think all human societies work that way. So the sort of, the whatever from rags to riches narrative, the American dream, and as well as just the general idea of like the life cycle and experience and, improving yourself, self-help, grind set, blah, 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 all of that. I mean, it seems, I'm just wondering if this is like something that somebody who had been born into a completely different culture, maybe they wouldn't experience this part of it if they were in poverty.
Well, if there's anybody who can be born into a culture that, if there's a culture, I should say, that would let you escape from this kind of thinking, they are rapidly shrinking, because I think it's based in capitalism. Because this is the number one thing I hate about the US, culturally speaking.
Right.
It's the belief, and this is fucking pervasive as hell, and nobody will ever say it, but they all believe it. Income equals value. Your income is equal to your personal worth as a person, as a human. Nobody will ever say this. Everybody believes it on some level. It is so pervasive. This is why you cannot ask. I think it's true, and almost is to some degree this belief holds in all capitalist cultures, but it's really bad in the US. It's so pervasive in the US. This is why it's well known that you cannot ask somebody what they make at their job. You cannot ask it, because it's equivalent to asking somebody what their worth is as a human. Like it's about the same thing. And you would obviously never ask that. So you would never ask somebody what they make. And if you ask somebody that question, for example, and they make some amount that they think is lower than what the conversation's expectation has set, maybe that's less than what they think you make.
Yeah.
It is like such a insane faux pas. You cannot recover from that. Like, it's so bad. And vice versa, if they make a lot more, like let's say they make a good amount more than you, they also won't want to say, because they know they make more than you. So it would be equivalent to saying that they're better than you. They don't want to do that either. That's also a faux pas or faux pas. And a lot of these cultural attitudes tie back into this central one, because, but it's, it's kind of, to make it sound not so bad, it is relative to your, to like who you know. It's relative to your local area. So if you don't make that much, objectively speaking, by national standards, your income is low, but the people in your workplace make like kind of similar amount, and your family makes like kind of a similar amount, and your friends make, in the ballpark, like it doesn't feel that bad. Like you don't feel like you're worthless or anything. You feel fine. So that's why I mentioned that previous time about how I think one of the reasons why people feel worse overall now is because of maybe social media, or maybe these rich people just have like more outreach now or something. There's like somehow a greater level of intrusion from, how do I put this? Like it feels like on social media, you just see more examples of success that you have not obtained. Like there's some kind of force of comparison there. Maybe it's the algorithms doing it. Maybe it reflects, because it could just reflect the algorithm's behavior. It could just reflect the growing inequality in society. It could reflect that the wealthy are like exerting more kind of social power through advertising and propaganda. Like there's maybe several different causes, but people do not like to rub up against that fact, where people do not want to feel that I make less money than I should based on whatever it is. Like maybe based on my age, I should be making more. Or based on, whatever. Maybe I've been working at this job for a certain number of years and I don't feel like I make enough relative to my experience. These things make people feel so bad when they think about them. And it's kind of brutal.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's kind of a slightly different example, but I have had, and I don't think it's as extreme in the UK as it is in the US, this cultural norm, but it's still certainly there. But I've just had, when I've spoken about the gender pay gap, I've had sort of female friends get quite offended because they're saying you think women earn less, therefore you're saying we're worthless. And I'm like, no, I'm talking about like discrimination. I'm not talking about you guys earn less because you're worth less. But just that assumption is so strong that I actually took me a second to figure out like why they were upset with me. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh shit, you think that I'm talking about your worth as a person rather than like the number on your paycheck.
Yeah, and it goes the other direction too, where people are apt to infer from someone's income what their contribution is to society. Like there's many people to whom those are literally synonyms. And that's why it's so hard to talk about anything to do with redistribution, for example, because if you believe that your level of income is equivalent, more or less, to your contribution to society, then what happens when an external force like the government redistributes income and changes people's incomes? That's literally like it's an affront to the natural order at that point. Because the two are equivalent. You're artificially changing people's contributions to society through changing their income. Like that's where a lot of these sources of confusion come from, because it ends up leading to kind of incoherent beliefs when you start. If you really do think that income is equivalent to human worth and contribution to society, and this amalgamation of value, it just leads to incoherent belief structures, in my opinion. But
well, I mean, you'd have to believe that Elon Musk is literally contributing $500 billion of value to.
That's why a lot of people think that, for real.
Yeah, but people do think that. Yeah,
probably a fucking moron, but his income's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the guy's, he's all sorts of bad in very obvious, demonstrable ways. Also extremely corrupt. So it's not like his money's being accrued fairly. That's not true at all. And I think, obviously I'm preaching to the choir here with you and with chat, but obviously there are so many things that contribute to somebody's wealth or their income or whatever other economic status they have, and often rich people extract wealth rather than creating it. There are all sorts of laws in place. There are things like bailouts. There's all of this intellectual property and stuff. It's pretty obvious. There's monopoly power and corporate power. There's exploiting workers, right? And by a similar token, a lot of people who don't earn very much do extremely important things, which is what we found out during the pandemic when we called them all essential workers, bus drivers and farmers and people who work in food stores and doctors and nurses and stuff, and then we sort of forgot about that. So it's pretty obvious on even I think it's a really it's almost like it's such a basic point to make that it doesn't map onto worth, but so many people believe it.
Yeah, but that's how you know that this kind of belief it's like determined by kind of macro forces. It's not incidental, because there was that pandemic situation with the essential workers, and it has not affected people's perceptions at all. Like they've gone right back to income equals value. Yeah, because I think it's just baked into kind of the natural progression of the system. I mean, there's a lot of analysis to do with it. I'm not qualified to do at the moment, for sure. But I think that if you were going to kind of try to attack the neoliberal order, this is home base. Like, this is headquarters. Income equals value. That is like if you kill that, or if you weaken that, you can make all kinds of progress. But as long as that holds, you will always be pushed back. Because, well, for obvious reasons they already know, but especially how easy it is to just turn capital into influence.
I mean, I wonder, you probably don't know the answer to this, or maybe you do, but I wonder how that's changed since sort of the 1980s. If perhaps there was, the belief wasn't as strong, maybe post-World War II, or maybe even before that, or if it's always been there. Is it sort of about
kind of funny
modern neoliberalism, or what?
It's kind of funny, right? Because people, like, Christianity is it's associated very tightly with capitalism nowadays and the neoliberal order, which is just mind-blowing for a historical reason. One, because Christians were not always like this in the U.S. for certainly. I think it was around 1920s, 1930s. Like most Christians were progressives.
Yeah,
like they were for redistribution, which was a much more natural view for them to take. Because I know a lot of liberals in the left-leaning folks and progressives like to hate on Christianity because of the modern association. But guys, like, Jesus was based as fuck. Like, have you read what Jesus said? He literally said that if you are rich, you will not go to heaven. You will not. Like, you cannot go to heaven if you are rich. He went into the temple and they were doing some market-based activities. And he's like, what the fuck? This has no place in the kingdom of heaven. And he just threw it all around. He's like, get the fuck out of here. Fuck you. Like, if you are rich, you are necessarily a selfish person. He said that. He said that type of thing many times. But nowadays, I've been to churches. Like, I've been to churches when I was looking for work. I was like, maybe they'll help me they'll let me mow their lawn or something. And like for one time, for example, I went to this church nearby here, hoping I could do some yard work or something. And I sat through the service, and he did his thing. And then he started talking about at the end how they're having like an entrepreneurial event where they're going to be teaching people how to run businesses and, accumulate capital. And it's like a fair type thing they're going to be doing in the church, where it's like a networking thing, so on and so forth. And then I came up after him and I'm like, hey, can I talk to you after? Because I have like a theological question, but also I want to talk to you about this other thing, mowing lawns. He's like, okay, go sit in the back and then I'll come back there. All right, so I go and sit in the back and like reading some pamphlet or whatever. And the preacher eventually finishes talking to his congregation or whatever, goes into his office, and then some other person comes in, or maybe he was on the phone, I can't remember. And he starts talking about how he works for some company. I don't remember what the company was, and he'd gotten a promotion, and he's making a lot more money now. And he's talking about how he's going to be taking some trips around, on a plane. And dude, the pride in his voice when he was describing like his come up was gut wrenching for me. I was like, whoa, are you kidding me? And he was so proud about it. And again, there's an entrepreneurial event in there. And then he came out afterwards, forgot I was even there, and left. And I was just sitting alone. Like, what the fuck is this? This is these guys worship Jesus? These guys worship Jesus.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Completely corrupted. I mean,
completely subverted.
Subverted is actually a better word for it. Yeah. So there's actually this economist called Michael Hudson, and I'm not qualified to comment on whether his thesis is correct, but he did not too long ago write a book about Jesus, and his speciality is like ancient economics, so he can read like ancient languages and shit. But he did a re-evaluation of Jesus as basically someone who wanted to cancel everybody's debts. And it was more of he's an economist, so it's more of an economist angle. I don't know how true it is, but it's in line with what you're saying, right? Like this is what Jesus was about. He was about helping the poor and basically hating the rich.
Yeah, the idea that income has literally anything to do with your worth is so antithetical to the teachings of Christ. Like, you really just can't even. They cannot be. But that's why that's been subverted. Like, the teachings of Christ are not consistent with the new line of thinking that your income, like the more money you make, the better you are. And so, because of that inconsistency, they developed their new. You've heard of prosperity gospel? Have you heard of prosperity gospel?
No, I haven't actually. No,
you haven't heard of prosperity. Dude, this took over the U.S. in like 1970s, 1980s, the period you were just mentioning. Maybe a little earlier, 1960s even. I'm not sure. It was like in that area. In that time range, and it goes up to the present day. As far as I know, it's still very popular. It's very simple. Prosperity gospel says that when you please God, God rewards you with material. That's prosperity gospel. Basically, God will reward you with more material, more success, and more money when you please Him. It's just so fucked. Like, that is so antithetical to what Christ actually said.
And that adds another layer as well, right? It makes it even stronger, I think, than the general sort of maybe secular cultural tendency that you were talking about, right? It makes it even stronger because it's like, no, it's not just that I'm like contributing to society. It's that God himself has rewarded me, right? Like, look how important I must be.
I mean, it's I don't even know if I would say it makes it worse, because it's basically a necessary. It's necessary in order to make Christianity and the dominant capitalist framework coincide. Like, this is prosperity gospel is the thing that makes them work together, because it makes it so that now you don't have to. You can serve both at once.
Yes,
because now you can believe that money is good and that income equals value, and you can believe everything about Christianity, and that somehow the meek will inherit the earth, but also Jeff Bezos is awesome and Trump is like really cool and good, and like an actual good person who's doing good for the world, even though he's a fucking billionaire and rich as fuck. Like, these things don't make any sense together. But with prosperity gospel, Trump is rich because, God rewards you for pleasing him and for doing good work. And same for everybody else. Like, the more money you have, that is evidence that you have done good moral work, which is, it's stronger, but it's honestly not even different from how seculars view it either. It's like the same shit. That's also how secular people view it. It's like, if you make more money, that is evidence that you work hard, which has moral import. So,
yeah.
It means that you work hard and that you are contributing to society in some way because of demand or whatever, like supply demand. People value what you do, so you are making society better, and you are working hard. So it's just more money equals moral worth. Like, it's just absurd. Like, I fucking absolutely despise that about the U.S.
Yeah, and there's actually two layers to this. Actually, you made me think this when you said moral worth, because there's if you earn that much money, then you're in some sense creating the revenue, the wealth, right, within the market economy, which is wrong, but maybe slightly more plausible than moral worth, which is like another layer to it, because obviously there are so many things that you can do that are moral or even just good in some sense that aren't necessarily rewarded with revenue, like friendships and like nature and lots of things, like they don't bring in revenue in the market economy. Now, of course, even within the market economy, it's not true either, because rich people extract revenue from others. But like, it's actually an extra step, right? To go, even if you conceded for the sake of argument, you create revenue, you're rewarded in concomitantly with the revenue you create in the market economy. Then that still doesn't mean that there's anything moral about it. It doesn't mean that it's right or good, right? It's just revenue.
I agree, but I also don't blame anybody for having this opinion, because the modern economy is like insanely fucking complex. Like, this, in my opinion, this is the main thing that separates the modern world from any previous time in history.
Yeah,
is that the complexity of the world is now like so much greater than the human mind can comprehend. Whereas I don't think that was like as much true in the past. I just don't, because people have gotten smarter because there's more education. So compared to year zero BC or whatever, the average person is smarter and knows more and is more educated. But the amount of complexity which has been introduced into the operation of society is like many factors on top of that, like many factors over in abundance. So, the complexity, and it's so holistic too. That's the insane part, is that the economy is very complex, but it's also holistic. So everything affects everything else affects everything, and it's all very entangled. There's so many entanglements, and you can't blame people for just not knowing what the hell's going on ever. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a simple heuristic.
Yep. So in conditions of uncertainty and confusion, simple heuristics will tend to dominate.
Of course. Yeah. I wonder if there's a bit of a delay.
What was that?
I don't know if we've got a bit of a delay. There might be a slight delay.
Oh, probably.
Yeah. No, there's nothing you can do. It's just that, that's why we've been interrupting each other. Yeah. You are touching your mic a lot, yeah. But that's okay. It's just that I think there's a slight delay, so we're interrupting each other a little bit.
So that's another thing, though, is that Leftists, this kind of pisses me off about people in your chat, people who even consume your content, just progressives in general. I don't like how they're always denigrating like working class people all the fucking time. It's annoying. They're always talking down about how fucking stupid people are because they like voted for Republicans and they have inconsistent worldviews. And I swear I see it all the time. They're always talking down about them because of their, because they'll always, to be fair, right wingers often do have inconsistent belief structures. It's fine. Like they vote for policies that are against their best interests. They are known to do this. And I just do not like how the typical explanation that you'll see from a blase progressive, not necessarily an academic, although you'll see this from academics too in many cases I've noticed. The typical explanation is that they're either just stupid, they're just unintelligent, they just don't have a lot of IQ, and or they are not mentally, like they're mentally lazy. They don't want to spend the effort to either do the research or do the thinking to see that, the actual progressive explanation for this phenomenon is the correct one, and that the right wing associated explanation is like overly simple and just nonsensical. But in my opinion, that's not really why. Because I've always been, well, not always. I've been a progressive for a long time now, and I've been in working class environments. And I've various times tried to have conversations about whatever, random progressive causes. And it is basically impossible. It's true. It's impossible to do. It never works. But it's not because my interlocutor is stupid or even lazy or anything. This is something that I would like people to understand, is that it's not because of any of that. It's because, how do I put this? So conversation itself has different roles for different classes. For working class people, the role of conversation does not work. It works in a certain way. It has a certain role. It's rather instrumental. So if I have a conversation with a working class, just a coworker at the grocery store or whatever, it's almost always, it will pretty much always be something that happens between activities. So maybe we'll be on break, or maybe one of us will walk up to the other one while they're doing something, and we'll exchange a little short conversation or whatever, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Even if we're outside of work, this pattern will still hold. The conversations you have in the working class are almost always something that you do between activities. When you're middle class, or especially if you're like an academic or if you're in a university, this is not how conversations work. They function entirely differently. When you're in university, for example, or college, a conversation is the activity. It is the thing you're doing. So this is the fundamental difference that makes it basically impossible to talk about a lot of this shit in working class life. Because you can't talk about anything that is not suitable as an interim between two different activities. The activities are the main thing. And then this is just something that you're doing in between. And this probably reflects in the tempo as well. You'll notice it in the tempo. And you can always tell, if I'm reading a book, for example, and there's two workers or something that are talking, I can always tell if they actually know if the writer knows what they're talking about or has a background. Because if one of the characters talks in a paragraph, it's nope, not that's right. That's not it. The tempo is always, I shouldn't say always, but generally speaking, there's a certain, how do I put it? It's very turn-based. So generally it'll go I'll say one sentence, or one phrase, and it'll be fairly short. It'll generally be a simple sentence. It'll be maybe 10 words. And then it'll be your turn. You say something that same length, and then I'll say something, and then it'll exchange like that. And even if one of us says a few, let's say a few sentences, it'll still be one idea that's being presented. So there will never be more than one idea at a time, ever. There will never be more than one premise. And so this is the tempo, because this is what's appropriate. This is what's appropriate to the function of how conversation works in general, of how it's something that happens either as a way to actually just convey specific information, like if you're on the job, for example, or if it's more leisurely in nature, it's something that happens between different activities. So what this means is that if you want to convey a progressive idea, like that minimum wage is good, I don't know, like that raising the minimum wage is like a good thing. It's practically speaking, it's almost impossible, because it is like a multi-premise. You're trying to convey a multi-premise point, which just like categorically cannot fit into the structure. Because what'll happen is, like, for example, one of the premises of that would be, what would it be? It'd be like, what would be the premises if you were trying to express the point of minimum wage going up, doesn't decrease employment? It'd be like these companies are already cutting as many people as they can. That'd be like one premise. And the second one would be, would be the second premise there, if you were doing this like formally.
Like what wages are too low?
The second premise would be there's like a margin between what they can pay and they have a decent profit margin, so that raising the minimum wage, doesn't, they're profitable as long as the minimum wage doesn't go past that line, and there's like a good amount of leeway there. It'd be something like that. Anyway, you need both of these in this example, you would need both of these premises in order to make your point that minimum wage is good. So what'll happen is you'll make the first premise, like you'll make the first point, and you'll express that in like one or two sentences. And then what you want to do is go on to the second premise, express that, and that way you can kind of get the conclusion of what you're saying. You can get the whole argument. But you can't, because it's not your turn anymore. Like you said the first premise, and now it's their turn. And this is where it gets fucked, because now they're going to respond to the first premise, or they're going to go off in their own direction. And so you can never, and let's say you even get past that, and now you also do the second premise. If there's enough time that's passed with what they said, and then you have to respond to what they said, because it's your turn now.
Yeah.
If enough time passed, they can't, like the first premise has already left the ego, it's left the brain. Or let's say you even get to the second premise, now you have both premises. You stated both, like you're just kind of expressing yourself. You're just trying to get it out there. But now you have to do the conclusion. So you have to do a third thing, but it's still not your turn. It's their turn again. So it's like, you just can't, because of the turn-based kind of tempo of it. And again, because you're always going to be doing this, let's say you're doing it with a coworker, you're doing it between activities. So you're time limited, and they're not trying to have, like, they're not expecting some kind of mentally taxing conversation in this context. So it's like, you can't even express it. Like, it's impossible to express in the structure of a normal conversation they could be quite smart, and you'll have this problem anyway. Like, anyway, and this is I think this is a big problem this is how these ideas cannot really, it's hard for these ideas to propagate because they're multi-premise.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a problem that you've specifically had, right? It sounds like you've experienced this frustration.
Yeah, I've experienced it many times because, like I said, you run into these tempo issues where you cannot express multi-premise points. Now, this doesn't necessarily hold between people who hold the same beliefs, though, because what will happen then is that, like, one of the premises, for example, that you would normally have to bring into the discourse will be already shared and understood between you. So that premise doesn't have to be stated anymore. So then the kind of requirements go down for stating the whole thing, if that makes sense. So now if you and me are both a progressive and we want to talk, let's say you and I are like coworkers in the steel mill or whatever, and you and I are both progressives, and so we share some of these kind of premises, these kind of foundational premises. That means any progressive point that relies on that premise doesn't have to be stated between us. So that means we actually can have this kind of dialogue in the typical structure without conflict. But as soon as you talk to somebody who does not share those premises, now it's impossible. All of a sudden it's impossible because you added one premise, and now it's like it triples the difficulty because just to express it. You're not even trying to like, I'm not even saying you're trying to like convince them necessarily. You're just trying to like have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Do you think this relates to kind of simple messaging and things like Trump's simple messaging and how that gets through?
So it's the reverse, actually. I think a lot of people this is another thing that annoys me, because progressives and leftists are always like, oh my God, the freaking Republicans and the Tories, they're so much better at messaging. They're so much better at communicating. It's like, no, not really. It's just that all of their arguments are simple premise. So they all think about all their positions. They all rely on like one premise. And then if there's more premises, all of those other premises are culturally understood in the background. So none of them have to be stated. This is like a huge fucking difference. That means that, if they're trying to message something, they just have to repeat the one premise over and over and then get a lot of repetition in. So it's like easy. It's like fundamentally just easier. Whereas if you're a progressive and there's not that cultural background for some of these premises, you have to talk about all of them and you have to put them together into a conclusion. So it's like, it's just fundamentally harder from a rhetorical perspective. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Yeah, but there are progressives, presumably. Which progressives would you say are quite good on this point? I mean, Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
One. Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, because he literally just picks a premise and then just tries to hammer that one home. So, for example, you'll always hear Bernie say like, he'll always say healthcare is a human right. Like it's just, and he'll list a bunch of examples of how the two things he tries to message on are that healthcare is a human right and that other countries are doing it better.
Yeah.
And he'll just hammer on the one point. Like he'll keep saying over and over that healthcare is not a privilege, that having good health is not like a privilege. It's something that you should be entitled to as a citizen. Everything he says is just related to the one premise. So he'll just do one premise. It's just one premise. He's not trying to make a bunch of fancy arguments. He's doing one premise and he's trying to hammer it home. That's that's probably the best strategy you can have.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I agree. And I think AOC's relatively good at it as well, but maybe not quite as good as Bernie. But
so an example of how you could do it badly in a way that I'm not. So let's say you're like Bernie Sanders and there's like a specific health care bill that you want to pass that's like single payer, some kind of single payer scheme. So now you'd be saying healthcare is a human right, and this specific bill, because of single payer, it'll better ensure that healthcare gets disseminated. So now you're two premises.
Yeah.
Now you're two premises. It gets a lot harder now, because now if you're like on a freaking news station, for example, you have only like 3 or 4 minutes. If you have one premise, you can hammer that shit home like a million times.
Yeah.
If you have multi-premise, then you might only get the whole thing out once. On top of the news people like maybe interjecting and stuff. And yeah, it's just tougher. So anyway.
This has been just like completely invaluable and eye-opening for me. But I do have to go in on the hour. So I just thought I'd give you like the final 10 or so minutes to talk about your game, which is obviously a bit of a shift in tone. But if you wanted to talk about the game you're developing, because I haven't played it yet. I think some people have, right?
In the invisible stages of the pyramid.
Yes.
So this is where you're already getting it messed up, because you're thinking, oh, if you have a platform, you could talk about the game, people will care. No, people do not fucking care until it's done. They do not care.
Okay.
I could talk about it right now until I'm blue in the face, and everybody in chat is probably nice. So they'd be like, oh, that sounds interesting. They don't think it's interesting. They don't give a shit. They don't care until it's playable and they can actually see some footage and it's like something they want to do.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
But it's an economic game, actually. It's a novel genre. It's like a new genre, too. So it's actually hard to talk about as well.
Oh, okay. Right. There's lots of unstated premises, I guess.
Was that about premises?
There's lots of premises. There's way too many premises to explain.
Of premises. It's right. I would need the whole section to get it at once, and you'll have forgotten the first part.
Okay. Well, that's fair enough. I mean, maybe
What's chat say? You can look at chat now for this 10 minutes.
you can chat. I can look at chat. I mean, what do people? Yeah, people are saying you're actually right. What do people? Do people have any questions for the final 10 minutes? I've kind of absorbed a couple along the way, but I've asked them really.
What's the chat vibe been?
Pretty good. People, there was a small amount of falling out, but I think it was cleaned up without need for any intervention. But people are just thinking about capitalism and everything, and they're enjoying your So, why is Connor saying remind him to plug his game? Connor hasn't been listening. Yeah.
But yeah, making an indie game is freaking hard as hell.
I mean,
again, it's like a 40-hour job, and then, like, for example, me, like, I've read Atomic Habits, like I've read the premium self-help books. I've gotten to the point where I probably won't get much out of reading more self-help books. I've got a program on my computer, for example, that blocks me from distracting programs during the hours where I've set to work. I wake up at 1 a.m. and then I work on my game. That's the goal. And then I go to work at like 6 a.m. And on my days off, I try to work on it. And I've got all this time blocked out. I follow best practices with like time blocking, where I do like a certain session time, that's optimal. And I do the break time that's on. I do put all this thought into it and all this work. And where am I? So I've got this program that tells me how much I've focused. It's a Pomodoro little program. It tells me how much I've focused. It'll tell me how much I've focused over the past week. So I can tell you for a fact, like, how much time I've put into the game this past week. And it's like, I think it's like 9 hours. That's not good. That's fucking bad. All of that shit I just told you about, all this effort and all this.
Wait, but it's only Tuesday. It's only Tuesday.
I mean, the past 7 days.
Oh, okay. The past 7 days. Okay, right. Okay.
So yeah, it's like, because this shit takes thousands of hours. It's like,
I mean, it's absurd. It's an absurd amount of work to create a game, right? Let alone one that's going to be good and people are going to like. Just one question that more than one person has asked is basically, we talked about your experience and stuff, and just like, what do you do against homelessness? And I've gone completely green. No, I'm back. Sorry. What do you do? Like, what do you think needs to be done? Is there anything that can be done?
Yeah, Singapore. Literally just copy Singapore.
It's a copy
Singapore just makes fucking houses. They just have a housing program. They have a combined private and public system. There's still a private market, right? You can still you can still rent whatever you want. But there's a very strong and large public housing sector where they will build houses. They're good houses. They're good houses. And how does it work? They're just like very reduced cost. They're cheap, and I think they give them away if there's programs. You can just get a house. And there's very little homelessness in Singapore. I think there's almost none, unless I'm mistaken. I'll have to look that up again. But they basically have the situation under control / solved. If you don't want to do that, that's too hardcore, then, just copy Nordic countries. It'll be fine. Like they still have homeless, but it's not as bad.
Yeah.
As far as I understand. I don't know what they do specifically though.
You don't see many. I mean, they have a lot of social housing. They do have housing giveaways as well.
They also have social housing.
Finland certainly has housing giveaways, and I think Sweden does. But yeah, like they just got a lot. They build a lot of housing and they make it available, right? And it's like, I guess it's a simple solution, right? But the solution doesn't have to be as complex as the problem.
All right, yeah. So no matter what, I don't think you're getting around just a strong social housing program.
Yeah, yeah. People who don't have houses, give them houses. Literally. Like, it's so mind-numbingly simple. I mean, it's the kind of thing that Bernie could repeat, right? Maybe with a bit of
it's the kind of thing that Bernie could repeat. Yes, we need another repeater though. Once he dies, though, then there's not going to be any repeaters.
Yeah, yeah.
You got any good repeaters in the Labour Party?
Oh God, Keir Starmer's all over the place. Actually, I don't. He literally has a new idea every week.
All right, so he's not a repeater by definition.
No, he's shit in general. Who's I mean, Angela Rayner is, her message is basically Tories bad, and she just sort of repeats that whenever you give her the chance, which is not, there are worse messages out there. So she does that. I think she's pretty good at it. But yeah, I don't think we've got enough repeaters, to be honest. And Corbyn had his for the many, not the few, which was a good one. That made some headway, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying. These politicians, I don't know if they think they're going to be Churchill. They're trying to do all this stuff. Dude, just pick a premise, repeat it on air like 1,000,000 times. That you're going to do way more good.
I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think what's the title of the game? Are you willing to tell us that? Or
well, it was called Auction Ace, because this is part of the issue. Is I was making it a mobile game, but then I freaking took an ADHD medication, and I realized that's a fucking stupid idea. No mobile gamer is going to want to play like an economic kind of new genre that's kind of complex and requires thought. It's like, this is stupid. So now porting it to desktops and making it a Steam game, because Steam also just has way higher discoverability.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Whereas mobile market, you cannot do anything if you're not already known and have a bunch of money. So port it to PC, and then also I might change the name to something fancier. Auction Ace is fine, I guess. It's basically a game where it's like a turn-based game essentially, where you get the ultimate goal is you're trying to make enough money from buying and selling items to pass certain like debt thresholds. And the more money you have, the better your odds are. But you don't know what you're buying is the thing. You know the type of item, and you know some information about how valuable it might be or what it might do. But you have to infer based on limited information. And that's basically the game. You're trying to make simple buy-sell decisions based on limited information.
Okay. I'm thinking that there does seem to be a relationship between that idea and everything you've spoken about today, right? Like, I mean, it's a loose relationship, but I don't know. It seems.
I'll get too deep here.
Okay.
I'm a game designer. I've made a lot of games.
Okay. Maybe not. Right.
Yeah, there's a story as well where the story is about like an academic who gets corrupted and brought into the financial world.
Okay. That's quite cool. Yeah. Well, maybe it's more related to my life then.
Got him.
Yeah. Diamond, it was just so fascinating speaking to you, and there's more to talk about as well. There's a couple of things that I wasn't able to ask about, but I have to go now. So thanks so much for coming on.
When's your book coming out?
My book's coming out in a month on the 13th of March. That's the UK release date anyway, but I'll put it on the channel for everybody. Thanks for plugging my book, yes.
I am going to pirate it.
You're going to pirate it?
Money on Patreon, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
You're allowed to. People are allowed to pirate it. No, I didn't say that, HarperCollins, if you're watching. Okay. Time to end the stream. I'm getting myself in trouble. Thanks, everyone. See you later.